The cold was a constant companion to Isolde. It seeped through the chinks in the stone walls of her cottage, a damp, persistent chill that settled deep in her bones. She had grown accustomed to the way it crept across the floorboards, the way it made the rough wool of her blanket feel inadequate against the bitter northern nights. But loneliness was colder still. That was a chill no fire could ward off. Isolde stared into the meager flames dancing in the hearth, their light flickering across the scarred wood of her small table and the simple clay bowl from which she had eaten her thin stew. Outside, the wind howled with a mournful cry that sounded like all the sorrow in the world given voice. The great elderwood forest crowded the edges of her small reclaimed patch of land, ancient and forbidding. Most people feared these woods. They called it the realm of monsters, a place where things older than memory still stirred. But Isolde had sought it out precisely for its fearsome reputation. The monsters in the forest were honest in their savagery. They did not smile at you and whisper promises of forever, while their eyes held the cold calculation of a merchant weighing grain. They did not call you beloved one day and discard you like refuse the next. The memory rose unbidden, sharp and cruel as a shard of glass. Lord Magnus, his handsome face, the way his lips curved when he smiled, a perfect, practiced arc of charm. He had promised her the world, a title, a home, a family. She, a woman of no significant birth, had been swept away by the sheer force of his attention. She had believed him. She had given him her heart, her trust, her body. Then came the pronouncement from the royal physicians. Barren, a word like a brand seared into her soul, useless to a man whose ambition required a legitimate heir. Magnus's charm had curdled overnight. The whispers started then, that she was not just barren but unhinged, prone to fits of melancholy, not right in the head. It was easier for society to believe her mad than to believe a man of his standing could be so cruel. He had cast her out, not with a bang, but with the quiet, suffocating indifference of a man swatting away a fly. Everyone had let him. They had looked away, their gazes sliding past her as if she were already a ghost. The women who had once envied her now pitied her with smug, sharp-edged sympathy. The men saw her as damaged goods. So she had fled. She had taken the small inheritance her grandfather, the old village herbalist, had left her and bought this forgotten cottage on the very edge of the kingdom, where the civilized world frayed into wilderness. She had chosen isolation over the slow death of 1,000 daily cuts of pity and scorn. Here, her only judge was the wind, her only companion, the cold. Her solace, the knowledge of herbs and healing passed down through generations, captured in the worn leather journal she wrote in each night, meticulously documenting the flora of these northern wilds. A new sound cut through the wind's howl, a sharp cracking noise, a branch perhaps, heavy with ice. Isolde tensed, her hand stilling on the rim of her bowl. She was always listening. It was the first rule of survival out here. Another sound, a low, pained groan. It was not the wind. It was not a falling branch. It was animal, and it was close. Too close. Her heart began a frantic, trapped bird rhythm against her ribs. Deer? A boar? No, the sound was too deep, resonating with a weight that spoke of something large, something powerful. A wolf. The thought was a sliver of ice in her veins. The woods were named for them for a reason. Great shadow-pelted beasts that moved like smoke and hunted with a terrifying intelligence. She had heard tales from the few trappers who dared venture this far. Tales of wolves the size of ponies, with eyes that burned like embers in the dark. Isolde rose slowly, every muscle screaming at her to douse the fire, bar the door, hide in the root cellar until morning. That was the logical thing to do, the sane thing. But then a third sound reached her, piercing the deep groan like a needle. A whimper, high-pitched, desperate, young. A pup. She found herself moving toward the door, her actions divorced from the frantic warnings of her mind. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, a low, gentle rumble from a lifetime ago. Compassion is not a weakness, Isolde. It is the strength that holds the world together. Never let them teach you otherwise. They had tried. Oh, they had tried. Her hand touched the rough wood of the door. Outside, the deep groan came again, followed by that heartbreaking, childish cry for help. She thought of herself, standing alone in Magnus's grand hall after he had dismissed her, how no one would meet her eye, how no one stepped forward. The desolation of that moment, the feeling of being utterly, completely abandoned by the world. I will not be like them. The vow was a whisper of fire in the cold landscape of her heart. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she lifted the heavy iron bar. The door creaked open on protesting hinges, letting in a swirl of snow and a blast of frigid air that bit at her skin. And there, at the edge of the flickering firelight spilling from her doorway, she saw them. Her breath was stolen from her lungs. The tales were not exaggerated. He was immense, a creature of midnight and shadow, bigger than any wolf she could have possibly imagined. His fur was the color of a starless sky, matted and dark with something wet. Blood. A great ragged gash ran along his flank, oozing slowly onto the pristine white of the snow. His head was low, but even in his exhaustion, he radiated an aura of breathtaking power. But it was his eyes that seized her. They were not the mindless eyes of a beast. They were amber, intelligent, and filled with desperate, agonizing pain. And they were fixed on her. Tucked beneath his massive chin, shivering violently, was a small bundle of fur. A pup. Its eyes were wide with terror, its tiny whimpers the sound that had pierced Isolde's heart. The great wolf's gaze held hers. It was not a threat. It was a plea, a silent, desperate negotiation between two wounded creatures at the edge of the world. He did not growl. He did not snarl. He simply held her gaze, and in that amber fire she saw a reflection of her own brokenness, her own fight for survival. Her fear was a living thing, a cold knot in her stomach. Every instinct screamed at her to slam the door, to run. This was a predator, the apex of this wild world. Letting it near was madness. But the pup whimpered again, a tiny lost sound in the vast, cold wilderness, and the wolf's gaze did not waver. It was a raw, humbling thing to witness. This magnificent, powerful being brought low and begging for mercy from a lone woman in a stone cottage. Her mind flashed with images of men in fine coats turning their backs, of doors closing softly but firmly in her face, of polite, empty words that offered no comfort, no aid. She would not be one of them. "All right," she whispered, the word a puff of white in the frozen air. She was not sure if she was speaking to the wolf or to herself. "Come on, then." She stepped back, pulling the door wider. An invitation, a crossing of a boundary she had sworn to keep sacred. Her safe place, her sanctuary from the world, now open to the most dangerous thing in it. The great wolf watched her for a long moment, as if gauging the sincerity of her offer. Then, with a pained grunt, he began to move. He hauled his massive body forward, dragging his injured leg. The effort was immense. He nudged the pup ahead of him with his nose, urging it toward the square of light and warmth. The pup, emboldened by its parents' prompting, took a few hesitant, stumbling steps before scurrying across the threshold and huddling near the warmth of the hearth, still trembling. Then the wolf followed. He collapsed just inside the doorway, his body hitting the floorboards with a heavy, final-sounding thud. His breathing was a ragged, shallow rasp. The metallic, coppery scent of his blood filled the small cottage, thick and cloying. Isolde closed the door, shutting out the wind and the howling dark. She slid the bar back into place, the sound heavy, definitive. She was locked inside with a dying giant and its child. For a moment she could only stand there, her back pressed against the cold wood of the door, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her breastbone. "What have I done?" The question was a silent scream in her mind. This was suicide, a foolish, sentimental act that would be her end. But then her gaze fell on the pup, curled into a tight ball by the fire, its tiny body shaking. And she looked at the great wolf, his magnificent form laid low, his amber eyes clouded with pain, but still fixed on his child. A silent, unwavering sentinel even on the brink of death. Her training, the knowledge passed down from her grandfather, clicked into place. It overrode the fear, giving her purpose, a path through the terror. "Okay," she said, her voice steadier now. She spoke softly, as if soothing a frightened horse. "Let's see what we're dealing with." She approached slowly, her hands held out, palms open to show she meant no harm. The wolf watched her every move, a low rumble starting deep in his chest as she neared his flank. It was not a growl of aggression, but of pain. "I know," she murmured. "I know it hurts, but I have to look. I can't help if I don't look." She knelt beside him, the scent of blood and wet fur and wildness overwhelming her senses. The gash was long and deep, torn into the powerful muscle of his haunch. It was jagged, not the clean slice of a hunter's knife, but the brutal work of claws or teeth. Another predator, something big enough to challenge this giant. The bleeding was steady. Too steady. If she couldn't stop it, he would be dead by morning. "I need to clean it," she told him, her voice a low, continuous stream of sound. "It's going to sting. I'm sorry." She moved to her stores, her grandfather's legacy of dried herbs and tinctures. She found what she needed: a clean cloth, a bowl of hot water from the kettle over the fire, a bundle of yarrow to staunch the bleeding, and a poultice of comfrey and calendula to fight infection and promote healing. When she returned, the wolf had not moved, but his eyes followed her every action with that unnerving intelligence. He seemed to be listening, understanding not her words perhaps, but their intent. She dipped the cloth into the hot water, wrung it out, and hesitated. This would be the test. If he snapped, if his pain overrode his control, her arm would be forfeit. Taking a breath, she gently, so gently, pressed the warm, damp cloth to the edges of the wound. The wolf flinched violently, a full-body tremor. A strangled cry escaped his throat, and the rumble in his chest intensified. His powerful muscles bunched beneath her hand, and for a terrifying second she saw the glint of his teeth. But he did not snap. He held himself rigid, enduring it. He turned his head away, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on the pup by the fire. He was holding on for his child. Relief washed through Isolde, so potent it made her feel weak. "Good," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're good. Brave." Working quickly now, she cleaned the wound as best she could, her touch firm but gentle. He trembled throughout, his ragged breaths filling the silence of the room, but he remained preternaturally still. Once the wound was clean, she packed the shredded yarrow leaves into it, applying firm pressure. The dark flow of blood began to slow, then slow further, congealing into a dark, sluggish ooze. Finally, she applied the thick, fragrant poultice of crushed herbs, covering it with a larger swath of clean linen she tore from an old tunic. She had no way to properly bandage a creature of this size, so she could only hope the poultice stayed in place. Her work done, she sat back on her heels, exhausted. The adrenaline that had fueled her drained away, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its wake. The great wolf let out a long, shuddering sigh. He lifted his head slightly and looked at her. The raw pain in his eyes was now mingled with something else, something that looked disturbingly like gratitude. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of his head before resting it back on the floor. Isolde's heart gave a strange, painful lurch. She turned her attention to the pup. It had stopped whimpering and was watching her with wide, intelligent eyes, the same amber shade as its father's. It looked hungry. She had some leftover broth from her stew. She warmed it, pouring it into a shallow bowl. She placed it on the floor near the pup, who sniffed it tentatively before beginning to lap at it with a tiny pink tongue. The small domestic sound of the pup drinking broth in her cottage was so surreal, so at odds with the massive, bleeding predator lying on her floor, that Isolde almost laughed. The hysteria was close, bubbling just beneath the surface. She forced it down. She was tired. She needed to sleep. But where? Her bed was a small cot in the corner, but she could not bring herself to lie down, to be so vulnerable. She settled for her chair by the fire, pulling her blanket around her shoulders. She would watch, just for a while. The fire crackled. The pup, its belly full, curled up again, this time pressing against the warm bulk of its father's chest. The great wolf was breathing more deeply now, more evenly. His eyes were closed. Sleeping or unconscious? She couldn't be sure. The night stretched on, thick and silent, but for the sounds of breathing. Isolde watched the rise and fall of the giant's chest, the twitch of the pup's paws as it dreamed. A strange, fragile peace settled over the little cottage. It was a peace born of shared crisis, of a truce declared between the wild and the wounded. She had opened her door to death, and instead had invited in a strange, broken family. She did not know their story, where they came from, what monstrous thing had attacked them. She only knew that in their desperation they had chosen her, and in her loneliness she had chosen them. As her eyelids grew heavy and she finally drifted into a fitful, shallow sleep, her last coherent thought was not of fear, but of a profound and aching curiosity. "Who are you?" The days that followed fell into a strange new rhythm, a routine built around the needs of her two wild guests. Isolde woke with the pale gray light of dawn, her body stiff from sleeping in the chair. Her first glance was always to the spot by the door. The great wolf was always there, awake before her, his amber eyes watching her with that unnerving, silent intensity. The pup was usually still asleep, nestled against him. She named them in her mind. It felt foolish, sentimental, but she needed a way to think of them. The great wolf was Alaric. The name felt right, strong, ancient. The pup was Orion, small, bright. The morning routine was always the same. She checked Alaric's wound. To her astonishment, it was healing at a rate that defied all logic. What should have taken weeks to close was already knitting itself together. The angry red had faded, and new, healthy tissue was forming. It was unnatural, magical. She cleaned it anyway, reapplying the poultice, her hands moving with a practiced gentleness. Alaric endured her touch with a stoicism that continued to awe her. He never growled, never flinched anymore. He simply watched her, a low, soft rumble sometimes starting in his chest, a sound she was beginning to interpret not as a threat, but as a form of communication, a rumbling purr of contentment. After tending to the father, she fed the son. Orion was a delight, a small, energetic creature full of yips and clumsy pounces. He devoured the broth and bits of softened meat she gave him, his tail a blur of motion. He seemed to have adopted her as a second parent, often tumbling over her feet or nudging his small, wet nose into her hand, demanding attention. She found herself smiling, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time she had smiled. During the day, a quiet domesticity settled over the cottage. Isolde went about her chores, mending, cooking, chopping wood from her small pile. And Alaric watched. Always, he watched. He lay by the door, a silent, colossal guardian, his gaze tracking her every movement. It should have been unnerving, but it was not. It was comforting. She had never felt so thoroughly seen and yet so completely unjudged. She started talking to him. At first it was just practical things. "I'm going to fetch more water, Alaric. I won't be long." Or, "This stew should be ready soon. I hope Orion likes rabbit." But the silence of the cottage, once a symbol of her isolation, became an invitation. His quiet, steady presence was a vessel she could pour her sorrow into, and it would not overflow. One afternoon, while darning a hole in her tunic, she found herself speaking of Magnus. The words came out in a halting, rusty trickle at first, then in a flood. "He said he loved the way I saw the world," she whispered, her needle stilling in her hands. She stared at the wall, but she was seeing another place, another time. "He said I was different from the other court ladies, less polished, more real." Alaric's head was up. His ears were pricked forward. He was listening. "My grandfather raised me to be practical, to see the value in small, quiet things, in healing, in kindness. Magnus said he admired that." She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "It was a lie, all of it. He didn't admire it. He saw it as something he could own, something quaint, like a rustic painting for his collection." She traced the seam of her tunic with a fingertip. When the physician told us about me, about not being able to have children, I saw the look in his eyes. It was like a shutter coming down. The warmth was just gone. He looked at me like I was a faulty piece of equipment, a mare that couldn't foal. A tear escaped, hot and traitorous, and rolled down her cheek. She dashed it away angrily. He didn't even have the decency to be cruel to my face. He just had people do it for him, the whispers, the pitying looks. He painted me as fragile, unstable, and everyone believed him because it was easier than believing he was a heartless bastard. She fell silent, her throat tight with unshed tears. The cottage was quiet save for the crackle of the fire and Orion's soft snores. A wetness touched her hand. She looked down. Alaric had moved silently. Despite his size, he had crossed the room and was now kneeling beside her chair. His massive head was resting on her knee, and his amber eyes were looking up at her, full of a depth of emotion that a mere animal should not possess. It looked like empathy, like sorrow. He nudged her hand with his nose gently, then licked away the tear track on her skin with his warm, rough tongue. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, it shattered the dam of her composure. A sob broke from her, then another. She buried her face in her hands and wept. She wept for the girl who believed in promises, for the woman who was discarded, for the years of suffocating loneliness. Through it all, Alaric stayed with her. His solid, warm weight against her leg was an anchor in the storm of her grief. He did not move, did not make a sound, simply offered his silent, steadfast presence until the storm passed. When her sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, she lifted her head. She felt hollowed out, but also lighter. She looked down at the great wolf, whose head was still resting on her knee. Tentatively, her hand still trembling, she reached out and stroked his head. His fur was thick and surprisingly soft beneath her fingers. She ran her hand down his powerful neck, over his broad shoulders. He leaned into her touch, a deep, resonant rumble starting in his chest. It vibrated through her, a soothing, primal sound. It was the first time she had willingly touched him beyond the necessity of tending his wound. It was not born of pity or of duty, but of a genuine, burgeoning affection, a connection forged in shared silence and unexpected comfort. In that moment, the fear she had held for him died completely. It was replaced by a fierce, protective tenderness. He was not just a wolf. He was Alaric, her friend, her silent confessor, her protector. And Orion, watching them with his bright amber eyes, was not just a wolf pup. He was her charge, her responsibility, her joy. A few days later, the first real snow of the season arrived. It fell thick and fast, a silent white curtain that erased the world, cocooning the cottage in an even deeper isolation. Her woodpile outside was running low. She would have to brave the storm to bring more in from the lean-to. She pulled on her thickest cloak and boots. "I'll be right back," she told Alaric, who watched her from his usual spot. He rose to his feet, a low whine in his throat. He did not like her leaving. "It's all right," she soothed, patting his head. "I'm just going to the woodshed. I can see it from the window." She stepped outside into a world of swirling white. The wind was sharp, biting, and the snow was already calf-deep. She fought her way to the small lean-to, her arms protesting as she gathered a heavy load of split logs. As she turned to head back, a shape materialized out of the blizzard. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, a snow-laden branch, but then it moved, and her blood ran cold. It was a man. No, 2 men, wrapped in heavy furs, their faces red with cold. They carried swords at their belts, and their sigil, a silver hawk on a field of blue, was one she recognized with a jolt of pure terror. It was the sigil of House Magnus. One of the men stepped forward, his eyes narrowed against the snow. "You, the woman from the cottage." Isolde's heart hammered against her ribs. She stood frozen, the firewood clutched to her chest like a shield. "What do you want?" Her voice was thin, stolen by the wind. The man smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. "Lord Magnus sent us. He's been worried about you, alone out here. He requests your presence back in the city." Requests. It was a command wrapped in the thinnest veil of courtesy. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "That wasn't a choice," the second man said, stepping up beside the first. He was bigger, more brutish. "Lord Magnus is a forgiving man. He's willing to overlook your flight. He'll find a place for you, a quiet place, out of sight. A convent or an asylum, a place to hide his shame, his inconvenient barren lover." The blood drained from Isolde's face. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I will not go." The first man's patience snapped. "Listen, you crazy!" His words cut off as a third voice, rough and menacing, came from behind them. "We've been tracking a wounded beast for days. Heard it took refuge nearby." Isolde looked beyond the two men and saw a figure emerging from the tree line, a tall, broad-shouldered man in leather armor emblazoned with the silver emblem of the Luvian Silver Hunters Guild. Her heart sank further. The guild was notorious, elite hunters who specialized in tracking and killing the rarest, most dangerous creatures of the Northern Territories, including the legendary great wolves. "We don't care about your little domestic dispute," the hunter said, his voice cold as the surrounding snow. "But we tracked that beast to this area. You seen it, woman?" Before Isolde could answer, a blur of black exploded from the cottage door. It happened so fast she could barely process it. One moment, the first guard's hand was reaching for her arm. The next, he was screaming, flying backward through the air to land with a sickening crunch in a snowdrift. Alaric stood over him, a vision of pure primal fury. He was no longer the placid, patient creature from the cottage. He was a demon of the storm, his fur bristling, his lips peeled back from his teeth in a silent, terrifying snarl. A low growl like the sound of grinding stone ripped from his chest. It was a sound that promised death. The second guard, frozen in shock for a heartbeat, drew his sword with a panicked yell. The steel shrieked as it left the scabbard. He lunged, a clumsy, fear-driven attack. Alaric moved with a speed and grace that was impossible for a creature his size. He sidestepped the thrust effortlessly, his massive body a black shadow against the white snow. He did not even seem to consider the man a threat. His focus, his entire being, was on the space between the men and Isolde. He was a living wall of protective rage. The guard, emboldened by his own terror, swung his sword wildly. The blade caught Alaric high on the shoulder. It was a shallow, glancing blow, but it sliced through fur and flesh. Alaric roared. It was not a sound of pain, but of pure, unadulterated fury. The sound ripped through the air, vibrating in Isolde's bones. The hunter, with the practiced efficiency of an experienced killer, raised his crossbow. The weapon was massive, its bolt tipped with gleaming silver. He took aim at Alaric's heart. "No!" Isolde screamed, dropping the firewood. Without thinking, she threw herself forward, placing herself between the hunter and the wolf. The hunter's eyes widened in shock. "Move, you fool woman!" "He's protecting me," Isolde said, her voice breaking. "Please, he's hurt. He has a pup." Something in her desperate plea gave the hunter pause. His eyes, cold and calculating, studied her for a moment. Then he looked at Alaric, who still stood protectively in front of her, teeth bared, a low, continuous growl emanating from his chest. The hunter lowered his crossbow slightly. "That's not a normal wolf," he said, his voice oddly quiet. "I know," Isolde replied, her heart pounding. "Please, just go." Before the hunter could respond, a sharp cry came from the cottage doorway. Orion stood there, his small body trembling, his amber eyes wide with fear. The hunter's gaze snapped to the pup, then back to Alaric. A strange expression crossed his face, recognition, then something that looked almost like awe. "Do you know what that is?" he asked Isolde, gesturing toward Alaric. "I know he's not a normal wolf," she said carefully. "He's intelligent, almost human." The hunter let out a short, humorless laugh. "Almost human, yes." He shouldered his crossbow. "Keep him hidden. There are others looking for him, not just my guild." With that cryptic warning, he turned and melted back into the swirling snow, leaving Isolde standing bewildered in the storm. The guards were getting to their feet, faces pale with terror. The one Alaric had thrown looked at his companion, then at the wolf. "To hell with Magnus! I'm not dying for this!" They retreated, stumbling through the deep snow, casting fearful glances over their shoulders. Isolde stood in the storm, her mind reeling. What had just happened? Why had the hunter withdrawn? A nudge at her leg brought her back to herself. Alaric was pressing against her, urging her toward the cottage. His wound was bleeding again, a ribbon of crimson staining the snow. "Come on," she said, gathering up the scattered firewood. "Let's get you inside." The warmth of the cottage enveloped them as they stepped back inside. Orion rushed to Alaric, whimpering and nuzzling him anxiously. Isolde closed and barred the door, her hands shaking. She turned to look at Alaric, who was watching her with those intelligent eyes. "Who are you?" she whispered. "What are you?" Alaric met her gaze steadily. For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in those amber depths, something beyond animal consciousness, something deeply, unmistakably human. Then he collapsed. His legs folded beneath him, and his massive body hit the floor with a heavy thud. A strange, shimmering light began to emanate from him, starting at his wounded shoulder and spreading rapidly across his entire form. Isolde stepped back, her hand flying to her mouth. The light grew brighter, so intense she had to shield her eyes. When she looked again, Alaric was gone. In his place lay a man. The man sprawled on her floor was magnificent. His body was long-limbed and powerfully built, his shoulder broad and muscular where Alaric's wound had been. Black hair fanned around his head like a dark halo against the floor. His skin was pale but marked with old scars that spoke of battles survived, and he was entirely naked. Isolde stood frozen, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. This could not be happening. It defied all logic, all natural law. Yet the evidence lay before her, undeniable. Orion whimpered, nudging at the unconscious man with his small muzzle. The pup seemed neither surprised nor frightened by the transformation, only concerned for his father's well-being. A soft groan escaped the man's lips. His eyelids fluttered, then opened. Those eyes, the same burning amber as Alaric's, focused on Isolde with painful intensity. "Isolde," he whispered, his voice rough with disuse, deep as thunder rolling across northern skies. She took an involuntary step back. "How do you know my name?" Her voice was barely audible, a thread of sound in the stunned silence. The man, Alaric, attempted to push himself upright. He winced, his hand going to his shoulder where fresh blood seeped from the sword wound. "You spoke it," he said. "That first night, when you were writing in your journal." Isolde's mind reeled. He had understood everything, every word she had spoken to him, every confession, every tear-soaked story of heartbreak and abandonment. She felt naked, exposed in a way that went beyond physical vulnerability. "Who are you?" she demanded, finding strength in the surge of indignation. He managed to sit upright, his movements fluid despite his injury. "My name is Alaric Blackclaw," he said, "King of Northfell." The words hit Isolde like a physical blow. The king? The reclusive ruler of the northern territories was said to be a harsh, unyielding man who rarely left his mountain fortress. Tales of his exploits in battle were legendary, but few had ever seen his face. "Impossible," she breathed. "I assure you, it is not." His voice held no arrogance, only a quiet certainty. Orion whined again, pressing against Alaric's side. The king, if that's truly who he was, ran a gentle hand over the pup's head. "It's all right," he murmured. "I'm here." The tenderness in the gesture pulled at something deep in Isolde's chest. Whatever else this man might be, his love for the wolf pup was genuine. "If you're the king," she said slowly, "then why were you a wolf? How were you a wolf?" The questions tumbled out, each one more urgent than the last. "And why were you wounded? Who was hunting you?" Alaric's expression darkened. "It's a long story." "I have time," Isolde replied, her voice firmer now. "And you owe me answers." She reached for a blanket folded at the foot of her cot and tossed it to him. "Cover yourself first." A flash of amusement crossed his face as he wrapped the blanket around his waist. "You weren't troubled by my nakedness when I was a wolf, "You weren't a man then," she retorted, a flush rising to her cheeks despite her best efforts. He inclined his head, acknowledging the point. "The royal bloodline of Northfell carries an ancient blessing. Some would call it a curse." His voice took on a rhythmic quality, as though reciting words learned long ago. "In times of great need or danger, we can take the form of the wolf, our ancestral guardian and guide." "All of you?" Isolde asked, her gaze flicking to Orion, who had settled at Alaric's feet. "The blood runs strongest in direct descendants. Orion is my son." The pup looked up at the sound of his name, ears perking forward attentively. "Is he also—" Isolde gestured, unable to complete the thought. "He is too young to shift at will," Alaric explained. "He was born in human form but shifted during our flight. Fear triggered the change. He will remain a wolf until he feels safe enough to return to his true form." Isolde sank into her chair, trying to absorb this impossible truth. Shapeshifters. The stuff of children's tales and fireside stories was sitting in her cottage, bleeding onto her floor. "You need healing," she said finally, professional instinct taking over where rational thought failed her. "Let me tend to your wound." She gathered her supplies, moving mechanically through the familiar tasks. As she worked, cleansing the sword cut on his shoulder, she pieced together a new understanding of the past days, the unnatural speed of his healing, the intelligence in his eyes, the way he had understood her every word. "You heard everything," she said quietly, not looking at him as she applied a fresh poultice to his shoulder. "Everything I said about Magnus, about my life." "Yes." The single word held a world of complexity. "I am sorry for the deception, though it was not by choice. I could not shift back. I was too badly wounded." Isolde's hands stilled. "What happened to you? Who attacked you?" Alaric was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as though weighing what to tell her. Finally, he spoke. "There was an ambush. Mercenaries hired by rivals at court." His voice hardened. "My mother's loyalists." "Your mother?" Isolde couldn't hide her surprise. "She tries to have you killed?" A bitter smile touched his lips. "The former Queen Ravenna. She ruled as regent after my father's death when I was young. When I came of age to claim my throne, she was supposed to step aside." His eyes grew distant. "She did not. She has tried 3 times now to have me eliminated." "Your own mother?" Isolde shook her head, unable to fathom such treachery. "Power is a seductive force," Alaric said. "And there are other complications." His gaze settled on her face, studying her with unnerving intensity. "The wound you treated when we first arrived, that was from her assassins. They ambushed us in the forest during my return from the southern provinces. Most of my guard was killed. Orion and I barely escaped." "And the hunter?" Isolde asked. "He recognized you, didn't he?" Alaric nodded grimly. "Luvian silver hunters are not common mercenaries. They are knowledgeable about the old bloodlines, the ancient powers. He knew what I was." "Why did he leave without capturing you? Surely there would be a reward." "A good question." Alaric's expression was thoughtful. "There are still those loyal to my line. Perhaps he is one such man." He shifted, wincing slightly. "Or perhaps he simply decided not to make an enemy of the king." Isolde finished binding his shoulder in silence, her mind racing. She was harboring a fugitive king, a shape-shifting king, in her tiny cottage at the edge of the world. Magnus's men knew where she was. Assassins and hunters prowled the forest. The simple, isolated existence she had carved out for herself was crumbling around her. "You should leave," she said abruptly, moving away from him. "Once the storm breaks, you'll be stronger then. You can return to your castle, to your people." Alaric watched her, those amber eyes penetrating. "And you?" Isolde busied herself putting away her supplies. "I'll be fine. I always am." "Magnus's men will return," he said, his voice gentle but unyielding. "They know where you are now." "I'll manage," she insisted, though dread coiled in her stomach at the thought. "You could come with us." The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Isolde turned to face him, searching for mockery or calculation in his expression. She found neither, only a steady, unwavering regard. "To your castle?" She laughed, the sound brittle. "A disgraced healer with no noble blood? I think not." "Why not?" he challenged. "You saved my life. You cared for my son. I owe you a debt." "I don't want your charity," she said sharply. "It is not charity to repay a life debt," Alaric countered. "It is honor." Before she could respond, a small voice interrupted. "Please come with us." They both turned. Where the wolf pup had been, now sat a small boy, no older than 4 or 5, with tousled black hair and those same striking amber eyes. He was wrapped awkwardly in a corner of Alaric's blanket, looking up at Isolde with a solemn expression. "Orion," Alaric breathed, relief evident in his voice. He reached out, and the boy scrambled to his side, nestling against him. "Hello," the child said to Isolde, his voice clear and sweet. "Thank you for the soup." Despite everything, the danger, the confusion, the impossible revelations, Isolde felt a smile tug at her lips. "You're welcome." "Will you come home with us?" Orion asked. "Father needs you." Alaric's expression shifted, something complicated passing across his features. "Orion," he began, a warning note in his voice. "You do," the boy insisted. "You said she was special. You said she smelled like home." Alaric closed his eyes briefly, as though praying for patience. When he opened them again, his gaze was fixed on Isolde, who stood frozen in the center of the room. "What does he mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The king sighed, a sound that contained decades of weariness. "There is more to this story, more that you should know." He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "Do you know the lore of the Alpha and Omega bloodlines?" Isolde frowned. "Children's tales. The Alpha kings who could command the beasts of the forest. The Omega queens with their healing touch." "Not tales," Alaric said. "History, though much distorted over time." He shifted, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his wound. The royal line of Northfell has always been Alpha, strong warriors, natural leaders, able to shift their forms. In the ancient days, they ruled alongside Omega queens, whose gifts brought balance and healing to the kingdom. "This is history, not myth," Isolde said skeptically. "History becomes myth when people cease to believe," Alaric replied. "The truth is that the Alpha and Omega bloodlines share a unique connection, a bond that transcends ordinary understanding." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "When I first scented you, when you opened your door that night, I knew what you were." Isolde took a step back. "What I am? I am a healer, nothing more." "You are an Omega, Isolde, a true Omega, the first I have encountered in my lifetime." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "Nonsense," she said sharply. "I am ordinary, common-born. The bloodline has scattered over the centuries, gone underground. Many Omega women have been persecuted, misunderstood, called witches or sorceresses." His gaze was steady, unflinching. "Did your grandfather ever speak of your grandmother's origins?" Isolde hesitated. There had been whispers, family secrets spoken only in hushed tones. Her grandmother had come from the far north, fleeing something or someone. She had possessed unusual healing abilities, gifts she had passed down to Isolde's grandfather, and through him to Isolde herself. "This is madness," she said, but her protest lacked conviction. "Is it?" Alaric gestured to his rapidly healing wound. "Your touch has always brought healing, hasn't it? Beyond what herbs and poultices should accomplish. You feel others' pain. You sense their needs. That's just empathy, skill." "It is more," he insisted gently. "Magnus did not discard you because you were barren, Isolde. He discarded you because he sensed what you are, even if he did not understand it. Your body was preparing for an alpha mate, the only one who could truly bond with you. You were not defective. You were waiting." "Waiting?" Isolde echoed, her voice faint. "For me," Alaric said simply, "as I have been waiting for you, though I did not know it." The audacity of the statement shocked her out of her confusion. "You expect me to believe that you, a king, have been destined for me? That is absurd." "Destiny is rarely convenient," he acknowledged with a wry smile. "But the evidence is before you. My wound heals at an unnatural rate under your care. Orion shifted back to human form in your presence after days of being locked in wolf form. These are not coincidences." "And what of your royal court?" Isolde demanded. "What would they say to their king bringing home a common healer as his— what? His queen?" Alaric's expression darkened. "My court is filled with vipers and sycophants. Many have aligned themselves with my mother. They would oppose any match I made, royal or common. But the old laws still stand. If I claim an Omega as my mate, none can gainsay me." "You speak as though this is already decided," Isolde said, anger rising within her, "as though I have no choice in the matter." "You always have a choice," Alaric said firmly. "I would never force this upon you. But I would be lying if I said I did not hope." His eyes, those impossible amber eyes, held hers. "In the days you cared for me, spoke to me, touched me with gentleness no one has shown me since my childhood, I have come to care for you, Isolde. Deeply." She turned away, unable to bear the naked emotion in his gaze. It was too much, too impossible, too terrifying in its implications. "I need time," she said, her voice unsteady. I can't." "Of course," Alaric said, his tone softening. "I ask only that you consider coming with us when we leave. For your own safety, if nothing else. Magnus's men know where you are. They will return." Isolde nodded mutely, not trusting herself to speak further. Her world had been upended, her understanding of herself, her past, even her supposed barrenness called into question. She needed to think, to process this cascade of revelations. "I'll prepare food," she said finally, grasping at the mundane to anchor herself. Alaric seemed to understand her need for space. He turned his attention to Orion, speaking softly to the boy, who was examining his human hands with fascination, as though rediscovering his own body after days in wolf form. Isolde moved to the hearth, stirring the stew that had been simmering. The routine task calmed her racing mind somewhat. She stole glances at the pair as she worked, the powerful, scarred king and the small, solemn boy with his father's eyes. They made an odd picture, huddled together on her cottage floor. The boy was asking questions now, his high voice curious and unafraid. Alaric answered with patience, his deep voice rumbling beneath the crackle of the fire. Isolde served the stew in her simple clay bowls, handing them first to Orion, who thanked her with solemn politeness, and then to Alaric. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and a jolt of something like recognition passed between them. She pulled away quickly, disturbed by the intensity of her reaction to his touch. They ate in relative silence, the only sounds the clink of spoons against clay and the howl of the wind outside. The storm showed no signs of abating, trapping them together in this strange, suspended moment outside of normal time and reality. After the meal, Orion's eyelids began to droop. The excitement of returning to human form, combined with a full belly, had exhausted him. Isolde offered him her cot, which he accepted with sleepy gratitude. Within minutes, he was soundly asleep, his small face peaceful in the firelight. Alaric watched his son with undisguised tenderness. "He has not slept so deeply since before the attack," he murmured. "He feels safe here. With you." Isolde did not know how to respond to that. She busied herself clearing away the bowls, hyper-aware of Alaric's presence, the way his eyes followed her movements. When she could delay no longer, she returned to her chair by the fire, facing him across the small space of her cottage. "Tell me about the attack," she said. "All of it." Alaric nodded, settling his back against the wall. "I had been traveling to the southern provinces," he began. "A diplomatic mission. Relations have been strained since my coronation 5 years ago." "Why?" Isolde asked. "The South was loyal to my mother. She was born there, and many still see her as the rightful ruler." His expression was grim. I had hoped to change minds, forge new alliances. I brought Orion with me, his first journey outside the capital. Was that wise? The question escaped before she could censor it. Rather than taking offense, Alaric smiled faintly. Perhaps not. But I wanted him to see the kingdom he will one day inherit, to understand its people, its challenges. The smile faded. I underestimated my mother's desperation. She must have had spies tracking our movements. The ambush? On our return journey. We were passing through the great forest when they struck. Mercenaries, hired assassins. My personal guard fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. His voice grew tight with controlled emotion. I shifted form to better defend Orion. In my wolf form, I am stronger, faster. But one of them, the leader, knew what I was. He had silver weapons. Isolde inhaled sharply. Silver was said to be deadly to the ancient bloodlines, a weakness passed down through generations. Yes, Alaric said, noting her reaction. The wound you treated when we arrived, it was from a silver-tipped spear. Had it struck my heart, not even your healing touch could have saved me. How did you escape? I killed the leader, but not before he inflicted that wound. The others lost their nerve after that, but more were coming. I could sense them. His gaze grew distant, remembering. Orion had shifted from fear. I gathered him and ran. For 3 days I ran, staying ahead of our pursuers, but the silver was working its poison. I could not shift back to human form. My strength was failing. And then you found me, Isolde said softly. Alaric's eyes refocused on her face. Then I found you, he agreed, though perhaps it would be more accurate to say that I was led to you. Led? By whom? By instinct, by the pull of the bond. He hesitated. Isolde, there is something else you should understand about the nature of the Alpha-Omega connection. It is not just a matter of compatible bloodlines or ancient magic. It is a lifelong bond, once formed, a sharing of strength, of healing, of... He paused, searching for words. Of what? She prompted. Of souls, he said simply. The ancient texts speak of it as a merging of spirits, two beings who become something greater together than they could ever be apart. Isolde studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. She found none, only an earnest intensity that was almost painful to witness. And you believe this bond exists between us? She asked carefully. I know it does, he replied. I felt it the moment you touched me. But its full potential remains dormant until both parties acknowledge and accept it. So I have a choice, she said, relief evident in her voice. Always, Alaric affirmed. I would never compel you, Isolde, even if I could. She rose abruptly, needing to move, to think. It's too much, too fantastic to believe. I understand your skepticism, he said, but consider the evidence before your eyes. My transformation, Orion's, the unnatural healing of my wounds, the way your touch calms both me and my son. Even if I believed all this, Isolde said, pacing the small confines of the cottage, what would it mean? You ask me to leave my home, my solitude, to enter a viper's nest of court intrigue, to face a queen who has already tried to murder her own son 3 times? I ask you to claim your birthright, Alaric countered, to stand beside me as my equal, to help me heal a fractured kingdom. As your queen? The word sounded ludicrous on her lips. As my mate, he corrected. The title is secondary to the bond. Isolde stopped pacing and faced him directly. You speak of bonds and destiny and ancient bloodlines, but you know nothing of me beyond what you observed in wolf form. I am not the woman you imagine me to be. I know you better than anyone in your life, Alaric said, his voice low and intense. I heard your confessions, yes. But more than that, I scented your emotions, felt the rhythm of your heartbeat, witnessed your kindness not just in words, but in countless small actions. You cannot hide your true nature from one who has seen you as I have. The raw honesty in his voice unsettled her deeply. She turned away, toward the small window beside the door. Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, a swirling white chaos that matched the turmoil in her mind. "The storm will last through the night," she said, changing the subject. "You should rest, regain your strength." Alaric accepted her retreat with grace. "Thank you," he said, "for everything you have done for us." Isolde nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. She moved to her chair, the only sleeping place left in the cottage with Orion occupying her cot. "Take the cot," Alaric said. "I can sleep on the floor." "Don't be ridiculous," she replied. "You're injured, and Orion is already asleep there." "There is room for both of you," he pointed out, "and I doubt my son would mind sharing with you." Isolde hesitated, torn between the ache in her back from nights spent sleeping upright and the intimacy of sharing a bed with the boy. Finally, fatigue won out. She moved carefully to the cot, slipping in beside Orion, who mumbled sleepily but did not wake. The small, warm weight of him against her side was strange, but not unpleasant. Alaric settled onto the floor near the hearth, his blanket wrapped around his waist, his broad back to the fire. In the flickering light, the scars on his skin told stories of battles survived, hardships endured. "Good night, Isolde," he said softly, those amber eyes watching her from across the room. "Good night, Your Majesty," she replied, a hint of wryness in her tone. A smile touched his lips. "Alaric," he corrected. "Just Alaric." Isolde closed her eyes, certain that sleep would elude her after the day's revelations. But the warmth of the fire, the soft breathing of the boy beside her, and the strange, comforting presence of the king across the room lulled her into a deep, dreamless slumber. She woke to sunlight streaming through the cottage window and the smell of cooking food. For a moment she was disoriented, the weight of a small body curled against her unfamiliar. Then memory flooded back. Isolde opened her eyes to find Orion still sleeping peacefully beside her, his face angelic in repose. Across the room, Alaric stood at the hearth, his back to her, tending to something in her cooking pot. He had found a shirt somewhere, probably one of her larger tunics, though it stretched tight across his broad shoulders. The sight of the king of Northfell preparing breakfast in her humble cottage was so incongruous that Isolde nearly laughed aloud. As though sensing her wakefulness, Alaric turned. "Good morning," he said, his voice low so as not to wake Orion. "I hope you don't mind. I thought you deserved a rest after all you've done for us." Isolde sat up carefully, trying not to disturb the sleeping boy. "It smells good," she admitted. "My skills are limited," Alaric said with a self-deprecating smile, "but I can manage a simple porridge." She slipped from the cot and moved to the small basin of water she kept for washing. The cold water on her face helped to clear the last vestiges of sleep from her mind, bringing her fully into the reality of her situation. A shape-shifting king was cooking breakfast in her cottage while his son slept in her bed, and yesterday he had proclaimed her his destined mate, a lost omega of royal blood. The absurdity of it struck her anew in the clear light of morning. Yet she could not deny the evidence of her own eyes. The man before her had been a wolf just a day ago. "The storm has passed," Alaric noted, glancing toward the window. "We will need to depart soon. It's not safe to linger." "Because of your mother's assassins?" Isolde asked, keeping her voice low. Alaric nodded. "And Magnus's men. They will return with reinforcements, now that they know where you are." The reminder of her own danger sobered Isolde further. She had been so overwhelmed by Alaric's revelations that she had nearly forgotten the immediate threat to herself. "Where will you go?" she asked, carefully avoiding the question of whether she would accompany them. "Back to Northfell Castle," Alaric replied. "It is the only place I can protect Orion properly, and from there I must deal with my mother's treachery once and for all." "How?" Isolde asked, disturbed by the grim set of his jaw. "By removing her from power permanently," he said. "I have been too lenient, too respectful of her position as Queen Mother. That ends now." "You would execute your own mother?" The thought horrified her. Alaric's expression was conflicted. "I would prefer exile, but the council will demand harsher punishment for treason. 3 attempts on the king's life cannot go unanswered." Isolde fell silent, contemplating the harsh realities of royal politics. It was a world utterly foreign to her simple existence. The thought of entering such a viper's nest made her skin crawl. Yet the alternative, remaining here, alone, waiting for Magnus's men to return, was equally unappealing. Orion stirred on the cot, his small body stretching as he woke. He blinked sleepily, his amber eyes focusing on Isolde with immediate recognition and trust. "Good morning," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. "Did you decide to come with us yet?" The directness of the child's question brought a flush to Isolde's cheeks. "I'm still thinking about it," she replied diplomatically. Orion sat up, pushing his tousled black hair from his eyes. "You should come," he said with the simple conviction of childhood. "Father needs you, and I like your stories." "Stories?" Isolde asked, puzzled. "The ones you told Father when he was hurt," Orion explained. "About the forest spirits and the healing stones. He told me about them last night when you were asleep." Isolde glanced at Alaric, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I may have shared some of your grandfather's tales," he admitted. "Orion was having trouble sleeping." "They were good stories," Orion said earnestly. "Better than the ones the court historians tell." Despite herself, Isolde smiled at the boy's serious expression. In just one day, he had somehow worked his way into her affections with his solemn manner and flashes of childish enthusiasm. "Come eat," Alaric said, serving the porridge into bowls. "We have much to discuss and little time." The three of them sat together, an unlikely family circle, sharing the simple meal in companionable silence. When they had finished, Alaric fixed Isolde with a direct gaze. "The time has come for decisions," he said. "Will you accompany us to Northfell Castle, Isolde? Not as my queen, not as my mate, but as my guest, until the danger to you has passed at least." Put that way, the offer was harder to refuse. Isolde looked around her small cottage, the sanctuary she had built for herself out of grief and rejection. It had been a good haven, a place to heal. But perhaps its purpose in her life was complete. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "I make no promises about this bond, this destiny you speak of. I come as myself, Isolde the healer, nothing more." "Agreed," Alaric said, though something like disappointment flickered briefly in his eyes. "Your position and title will be of your own choosing. And I will be free to leave when I wish, to return here or go elsewhere?" "You will never be a prisoner," Alaric promised, "though I hope you will give Northfell a chance to become a home to you." Isolde hesitated one final moment, then nodded. "Very well, I will come with you." Orion's face lit up with a brilliant smile. "I knew you would," he exclaimed, bouncing slightly in his seat. Alaric's reaction was more controlled, but the relief in his expression was evident. "Thank you," he said simply. "You will not regret this decision." "I hope not," Isolde replied, already wondering if she had lost her mind. "When do we leave?" "As soon as possible," Alaric said. "We have a long journey ahead, and enemies on all sides." The journey through the forest was arduous but swift. Alaric insisted they travel on foot, avoiding the main roads where Magnus's men or his mother's assassins might be patrolling. Isolde had packed what little she valued: her grandfather's herbalism journals, a few precious tools, and the clothes on her back. The rest she left behind without regret. Orion remained in human form, a decision made collectively after much discussion. A child on foot would draw less attention than a wolf pup, should they encounter travelers. Alaric had fashioned crude boots for the boy from scraps of leather, and Isolde had altered one of her smaller tunics to fit his small frame. The king himself was a revelation on the trail. Despite his royal status, he moved through the wilderness with the easy confidence of one born to it, identifying game trails, reading weather patterns, finding water sources with unerring accuracy. He hunted for their meals, taught Orion to identify edible plants, and kept watch while Isolde and the boy slept. On the third day, as they crossed a frozen stream, Isolde finally gave voice to a question that had been gnawing at her. "If you're truly the king," she asked, helping Orion navigate the slippery stones, Won't your court be searching for you? Sending out patrols?" Alaric, who had gone ahead to scout the far bank, paused and turned back to her. "They believe I'm dead," he said simply. Isolde stared at him. "What?" "The ambush was witnessed by a survivor of my guard. He returned to the castle with news of the attack, reporting that both Orion and I had fallen." A grim smile touched Alaric's lips, an assumption my mother was no doubt happy to encourage. "But your counselors, your loyal supporters, surely they wouldn't just accept—" "My supporters have likely been rounded up and imprisoned," Alaric interrupted. "Or worse, my mother would waste no time consolidating power." "Then we're walking into a trap," Isolde said, suddenly alarmed. "If she believes you dead and has seized control—" "We're not walking in through the front gates," Alaric assured her. "There are ways into the castle known only to the royal bloodline, secret passages built by my ancestors centuries ago." Isolde was not comforted. "And once inside? What then? You reveal yourself dramatically and hope everyone simply bows to your authority?" "Something like that," Alaric admitted, a hint of wryness in his tone. "Though I do have allies within the castle walls, trusted servants and guards who would die before betraying me." "If they're still alive," Isolde muttered. Alaric's expression darkened. "Yes, if they're still alive." They resumed their journey, the mood considerably heavier. Orion, sensing the tension between the adults, was unusually quiet, staying close to his father's side. That night, as they made camp in the shelter of a massive fallen tree, Isolde found herself watching Alaric as he taught Orion to build a fire. The boy listened with rapt attention, his small face serious, as his father demonstrated how to arrange the kindling. There was tenderness in Alaric's instruction, a gentle patience that belied his fierce reputation. When the fire was crackling merrily, and Orion had been tucked into his makeshift bed of pine boughs, Alaric joined Isolde where she sat against the fallen trunk. "You think I'm leading you to your death," he said without preamble. Isolde didn't deny it. "I think your confidence borders on arrogance," she replied. "Your mother has had weeks to secure her position, to eliminate those loyal to you, and we are 3 against what sounds like an entire castle full of enemies." "Not entirely against us," Alaric corrected. "Many serve her out of fear, not loyalty. When they see I live, they will rally to my banner." "You place great faith in people who believe they're serving a usurper." Alaric sighed, running a hand through his long dark hair. "What would you have me do, Isolde? Abandon my throne, my responsibility to my people? Allow my mother to continue her tyranny unchallenged?" "Of course not," Isolde said, frustrated. "But perhaps we need more than just the element of surprise. We need allies, information about what's happening inside the castle." Alaric was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "There is a village," he said finally, "a day's journey from here, a loyal settlement that has served the royal family for generations. We could stop there, gather news, perhaps find allies willing to aid our cause." Isolde nodded, relieved that he was considering a more cautious approach. "That sounds wiser." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "You will make a formidable queen, should you choose to accept your destiny." "I haven't accepted anything," Isolde reminded him sharply. "Don't confuse pragmatism with ambition." "As you wish," Alaric conceded, though the smile remained. "Get some rest. We have a long day ahead tomorrow." The village of Thornhold was nestled in a valley between 2 forested hills, a collection of sturdy timber buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade. Smoke rose from chimneys, and as they approached, they could hear the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer. Alaric stopped them at the edge of the tree line, his expression grave. "I must ask you both to wait here," he said. "I need to assess the situation before revealing our presence." "Is that wise?" Isolde asked. "Going alone?" "I'll be in wolf form," he explained, "less conspicuous and better able to escape if there's trouble." Before she could protest further, he had stepped behind a large oak tree. There was a soft shimmering in the air, and then the great black wolf emerged, amber eyes fixing on Isolde and Orion briefly before turning toward the village. "Be careful," Isolde called after him, feeling strangely anxious as she watched the massive shape lope away through the trees. Orion pressed against her side. "Father will be fine," he said with a child's unshakable confidence. "He's the strongest alpha in the kingdom." "Alpha," Isolde repeated, the term still strange on her tongue. "What does that mean to you, Orion? To be an alpha?" The boy considered the question seriously. "Father says it means we protect our pack," he answered finally. "That we're strong so others can be safe." Such a simple definition, yet it revealed much about how Alaric had raised his son, not with talk of power or dominance, but of protection and responsibility. "And what about Omegas?" she asked, curious about the child's perspective. "What does your father say about them?" Orion's face brightened. "They're special, really rare. Father says they bring balance and healing to the kingdom, that without them, alphas become—" He frowned, searching for the word. "Tyrannical." "Tyrannical," Isolde corrected gently, surprised by such a concept coming from a child so young. "Yes, Father says that's why things have been hard in the kingdom, because there haven't been any Omegas for a long time, but now we found you." He beamed up at her, as though she were a long-lost treasure finally recovered. Isolde didn't know how to respond to such innocent certainty. She was saved from having to answer by the return of Alaric, still in wolf form, emerging from the trees at a trot. When he reached them, he disappeared behind the oak again, and moments later rejoined them in human form, his expression troubled. "What is it?" Isolde asked, immediately alert to his concern. "The village is occupied," he said grimly. "Royal guards, my mother's men, are stationed at the gate and patrolling the streets." "Looking for you?" "No," Alaric replied, his jaw tight with anger. "Enforcing new taxes, punishing those unable to pay with public floggings." Isolde's stomach turned at the thought. "This has happened in the few weeks since your disappearance?" "My mother wastes no time," Alaric said bitterly. "She has always resented these outlying villages for their loyalty to my father, and later to me. Now she takes her revenge." "So we can't enter," Isolde concluded. "Not openly, no." Alaric's gaze shifted to a path leading around the edge of the village toward the hills beyond. "But there is another way. The innkeeper, Eldrith, is an old friend. Her establishment has a secret cellar accessible from outside the walls. It was built as a smuggler's route in less lawful times." "You want to sneak in?" Isolde was skeptical. "With a child?" "I want information," Alaric corrected. "And Eldrith can provide it, if we can reach her without being seen." It was nearly dusk by the time they made their way to the hidden entrance Alaric had described. It was well concealed, a heavy wooden trap-door set into the hillside behind the inn, covered with earth and overgrown with brambles. Had Alaric not known exactly where to look, they would never have found it. The passage below was dark and smelled of damp earth and old wine. Alaric led the way, a small oil lamp he'd brought from Isolde's cottage casting eerie shadows on the rough stone walls. Orion followed, his small hand clutched tightly in Isolde's as they navigated the narrow tunnel. They emerged into a wine cellar, dusty bottles lining crude wooden shelves. Alaric extinguished the lamp and moved silently to the stairs, listening for movement above. Apparently satisfied, he gestured for them to follow. The inn's kitchen was deserted, the fire banked low in the massive hearth. Alaric moved with surprising stealth for a man of his size, checking each doorway before proceeding. He led them to a small back chamber that appeared to serve as an office or private dining room. "Wait here," he instructed in a whisper. "I'll find Eldrith." Isolde and Orion huddled in the dimly lit room, listening to the muffled sounds of voices and laughter from the common room beyond. Orion leaned against Isolde, his eyelids drooping with exhaustion from the day's journey. Minutes stretched into what felt like an hour before the door finally opened again. Alaric entered, accompanied by a stout, gray-haired woman with sharp eyes and a shrewd expression. She closed the door firmly behind her, then turned to survey the newcomers. Her eyes widened when they fell on Alaric's face, illuminated now in the light of the candle she carried. "By all the gods," she breathed, setting the candle down with a shaking hand. "They said you were dead, Your Majesty." "Reports of my demise were greatly exaggerated," Alaric replied with a grim smile. "It's good to see you, Eldrith." The woman seemed to gather herself, straightening her spine. And you, sire. When these jackals arrived a fortnight ago, proclaiming Queen Ravenna regent once more and instituting these brutal taxes." She broke off, noticing Orion for the first time. "The prince lives as well. Thank the old powers." "We need your help, Eldrith," Alaric said, his voice low and urgent. "Information about what's happening at the castle, who remains loyal, what forces my mother commands." Eldrith's expression sobered. "It's dire, Your Majesty. The Queen has imprisoned your supporters, Lord Commander Thorne, Lady Freya of the Royal Guard, half the council. Those she couldn't turn, she locked away. Some say she's executed them in secret, though I've heard no confirmation of that." Alaric's face hardened at the names, particularly the first. "Thorne lives?" "Last I heard," Eldrith confirmed, "though they say he's held in the deep cells beneath the East Tower." "And the castle defenses?" "Doubled, at least. The Queen has brought in mercenaries from the eastern provinces, brutal men with no loyalty but to gold. They patrol the walls day and night." Alaric absorbed this information, his expression calculating. "What of the common folk? The castle servants, the city dwellers?" "They suffer," Eldrith said bluntly. "New taxes, harsh punishments for minor infractions. Many whisper your name in secret, praying for your return." Her gaze shifted to Isolde, noting her presence for the first time. "And who is this?" Before Alaric could respond, Isolde stepped forward. "I'm Isolde, a healer who helped the king and his son when they were injured." Eldrith's shrewd eyes took in her simple clothing, her direct gaze. "A healer, is it? Well, we've need of those these days, with all the floggings and beatings." She turned back to Alaric. "What is your plan, sire? Surely you don't mean to storm the castle with just the three of you." "We need allies," Alaric admitted. "Loyal men and women willing to fight. A way into the castle that bypasses the main gates." Eldrith considered this. "There are those who would rally to your banner, even now. Former soldiers, hunters, ordinary folk fed up with the Queen's cruelty. As for getting into the castle," she hesitated, "there is one who might help. A guard captain who comes here to drink most evenings. He's no friend to the Queen, though he serves her out of fear for his family." "Can you arrange a meeting?" Alaric asked. "Tonight, if you wish. He should arrive within the hour." Eldrith glanced at Orion, who was fighting to keep his eyes open. "The child needs rest. There's a small chamber above where you can wait. No one will disturb you there." The room Eldrith provided was spare but clean, with a narrow bed and a small fireplace where embers glowed dimly. Orion fell asleep almost as soon as he was laid on the bed, exhaustion finally claiming him. Isolde sat beside the sleeping child, her mind racing with all they had learned. The situation was even more perilous than she had feared. A castle in lockdown, loyalists imprisoned, mercenaries patrolling the walls. It seemed impossible that they could succeed against such odds. "You're thinking we should turn back," Alaric said softly, reading her expression. Isolde didn't deny it. "Your mother has consolidated power more thoroughly than you anticipated. She has imprisoned or killed your supporters. The castle is heavily guarded. This is suicide, Alaric." He moved to sit beside her on the edge of the bed, his weight causing the simple frame to creak. "Perhaps," he conceded. "But what alternative do we have? To flee the kingdom? Abandon my people to my mother's tyranny?" "There must be another way," Isolde insisted. "Raise an army from the outlying provinces. Appeal to neighboring kingdoms for aid." Alaric shook his head. "That would take months, even years. By then, my mother will have eliminated anyone who might still be loyal to me, and the neighboring kingdoms would exact a heavy price for their assistance, territory, resources, perhaps even Orion as a hostage to ensure my good behavior." He was right, and Isolde knew it. But the thought of walking into such obvious danger made her blood run cold, especially with a child involved. "I won't risk Orion," she said firmly. "Whatever plan we make, he cannot be part of it." Alaric's expression softened as he gazed at his sleeping son. "Agreed. He will need to remain somewhere safe while we enter the castle." The use of "we" did not escape Isolde's notice. "I never agreed to accompany you on this suicide mission," she pointed out. "No," Alaric acknowledged, "but you will." "Why are you so certain?" His amber eyes met hers, warm and knowing. Because you cannot stand by while others suffer, Isolde. It's not in your nature. You opened your door to a dying wolf and his pup when any sane person would have barred it. You defied Magnus's men and a professional hunter to protect us. You agreed to leave your sanctuary to help us reach safety. His voice gentled. You care, Isolde, deeply and truly. It is the heart of what you are. The assessment was so accurate, so penetrating, that Isolde found herself speechless. He had seen through to her core, to the truth she rarely acknowledged even to herself. That doesn't mean I'll follow you into certain death, she managed finally. No, he agreed. It means you'll help me find a way to succeed where failure seems inevitable. A smile touched his lips. And that, Isolde, is why you would make a formidable queen. Before she could formulate a response, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. Eldrith entered, her expression grave. Captain Roderick is here, she said quietly, and he brings grave news. The guard captain was a weathered man in his 40s, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw and the bearing of one who had seen too many battles. He rose from his seat at the small table when Alaric entered, his eyes widening in recognition. Your Majesty, he breathed, dropping to one knee. They said you were dead. Rise, Captain, Alaric said, gesturing for the man to be seated again. I understand you have news. Roderick glanced nervously at Isolde as she entered behind the king. Alaric noted his hesitation. This is Isolde, a trusted ally. Speak freely. The captain nodded, though his expression remained guarded. The situation at the castle has deteriorated further, sire. The queen has announced your brother's return from exile. She means to crown him king at the next full moon. Alaric went very still. I have no brother. Roderick's discomfort was palpable. The queen claims Prince Magnus is your father's firstborn son from a liaison before his marriage to her. That he was exiled as a child, but has now returned to claim his rightful place. Magnus? Isolde couldn't contain her shock. Lord Magnus is claiming to be the king's brother? Half-brother, Roderick corrected. And yes, he arrived at court 3 days ago, wearing royal colors and calling himself Prince Magnus of House Blackclaw. Alaric's expression had turned to stone. This is absurd, a transparent ploy to legitimize a usurper. The court appears to believe it, Roderick said, or at least no one dares contradict the queen. She has produced documents purporting to be from your father, acknowledging Magnus as his son. Forgeries, Alaric spat. My father would never have acknowledged a bastard without telling me. Isolde's mind was reeling. Magnus, her former betrothed, the man who had discarded her like unwanted baggage, now claimed royal blood? Was positioning himself to take Alaric's throne? The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. That's why he courted me, she murmured, the realization dawning. Why he was so enraged when he learned I couldn't bear children. He needed an heir to solidify his claim. Alaric's head whipped around, his gaze piercing. What? Magnus courted me shortly after your father died, Isolde explained, the timeline suddenly clear in her memory. He appeared in our village, charming and attentive. I was flattered by the attention of such a high-born lord, but when the physicians declared me barren, his manner changed overnight. Her voice hardened. Now I understand. He wasn't looking for love. He was looking for a broodmare to strengthen his false claim to your throne. And when you couldn't provide him with an heir, he discarded you, Alaric concluded, anger flashing in his amber eyes. Your Majesty, Roderick interrupted hesitantly, there's more. The Queen has scheduled Lord Commander Thorne's public execution for tomorrow at midday. She claims he was part of a conspiracy against the crown. Alaric's expression turned dangerous. Thorne has been loyal to my family for 30 years. This is a message, a warning to anyone who might still be loyal to me. It's also an opportunity, Isolde said slowly, an idea forming. Public executions mean crowds, confusion, divided attention among the guards. Alaric looked at her sharply, understanding dawning in his eyes. You suggest we use the execution as cover for our entrance into the castle? It would be unexpected, Isolde acknowledged, Everyone's eyes will be on the scaffold, not on those entering the castle, and if we can free the Lord Commander during the confusion, we gain a powerful ally, Alaric finished, and create a symbol that could rally others to our cause. Captain Roderick was nodding slowly. It could work. The castle guard will be stretched thin, with many assigned to crowd control in the main square. The south postern gate will be lightly defended. "Can you get us through that gate?" Alaric asked. Roderick hesitated only briefly. "Yes, Your Majesty. I'm assigned to that post tomorrow. I can let you in during the shift change when eyes are elsewhere." "Good," Alaric said, his expression resolute. "Once inside, we'll need to move quickly to reach the scaffold before the execution begins." "And Orion?" Isolde pressed. "Where will he be during all this?" "With me," Eldrith interjected firmly. She had been listening from the doorway. "I'll keep him safe in the secret cellar. No one will find him there." Alaric nodded, though concern lingered in his eyes. "He won't like being separated from us." "He'll like watching his father's execution even less," Isolde pointed out bluntly. "Agreed," Alaric conceded with a grim nod. "We'll tell him in the morning. For now, let's plan our approach." They spent the next hour poring over a crude map of the castle that Roderick sketched on a piece of parchment, identifying guard positions, discussing routes to the main square, and planning their escape once they had freed Thorn. It was nearly midnight when the captain finally left, promising to meet them at the south gate at the appointed time. When they returned to their small chamber, Orion was still sleeping soundly, oblivious to the dangerous plan being formulated around him. Isolde watched the rise and fall of his small chest, her heart aching at the thought of what tomorrow might bring. "We don't have to do this," she said softly to Alaric. "We could still flee, find another way, a safer way." Alaric moved to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on his sleeping son. "If it were just my life at stake, perhaps. But this is about more than me now. It's about Orion's future, the future of the kingdom." His voice dropped lower, a rough whisper of contained emotion. "And it's about you, Isolde." "Me?" She turned to look at him, startled. "I saw your face when Roderick mentioned Magnus. The pain, the anger." His amber eyes held hers steadily. "He hurt you deeply, used you for his ambitions, and discarded you when you no longer served his purpose. And now he seeks to steal my son's birthright, to rule a kingdom he has no claim to." "This isn't about vengeance," Isolde insisted, though part of her recognized the dark satisfaction she'd felt at the thought of confronting Magnus, of seeing him exposed for the fraud he was. "No," Alaric agreed. "It's about justice. For you, for Thorn, for every citizen suffering under my mother's cruelty." He placed a hand on her shoulder, the touch warm and grounding. "We can do this, Isolde. Together." The certainty in his voice was almost hypnotic. Despite her misgivings, Isolde found herself nodding. "Together," she echoed, the word both a promise and a prayer. They slept in shifts that night, neither willing to leave Orion unguarded. In the gray light of dawn, Alaric gently woke his son and explained their plan, or at least the version deemed appropriate for a child's ears. Orion would stay with Eldrith while they went to the castle to rescue friends who were in trouble. The boy was predictably resistant. "I want to come with you," he insisted, his lower lip jutting out stubbornly. "I know, brave one," Alaric said, kneeling to meet his son's eyes. "But I need you to be strong in a different way today. I need to know you're safe so I can focus on what must be done." "You'll come back?" Orion asked, his voice suddenly small and uncertain. "Both of you?" "We will," Alaric promised, though Isolde heard the slight catch in his voice that betrayed his doubt. "I'll take good care of your father," Isolde added, kneeling beside Alaric. "That's what Omegas do, right? They look after their alphas." The words came easily, surprising her with their sincerity. Somewhere along this strange journey, she had begun to think of herself as Orion had described, not just a healer, but an Omega with all the ancient responsibility that entailed. Orion brightened at her words. "And then we'll all go home together?" "Yes," Alaric said, ruffling his son's hair. Then we'll go home." The rest of the morning passed in tense preparation. Eldrith provided them with plain, nondescript clothing that would help them blend in with the crowds. Alaric reluctantly relinquished his hunting knife for a smaller, more easily concealed dagger. Isolde gathered what herbs and supplies she could, anticipating injuries that would need treatment. By mid-morning, they were ready. Orion had been settled in the secret cellar with books, toys, and enough food to last a day. Eldrith would stay with him, ready to flee with the child if they did not return by nightfall. As they prepared to leave through the hidden tunnel, Orion threw his arms around both of them, clinging tightly. "Be careful," he whispered, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Remember, you promised." "We'll remember," Alaric assured him, holding his son close for one last, fierce embrace before passing him to Eldrith's care. The journey through the tunnel and around the village perimeter was tense but uneventful. They kept to the tree line, avoiding the main roads where patrols might spot them. By noon, they had reached the small copse of trees nearest the castle's south wall, where they waited for the appointed time. The castle of Northfell was a formidable structure, built of dark stone and perched on a rocky outcropping that overlooked the surrounding countryside. Its towers stretched toward the sky like accusing fingers, and its walls were thick enough to withstand siege. It was both beautiful and terrible, a testament to the power of those who ruled within. As the sun reached its zenith, they saw movement at the south postern gate. Guards were changing shifts, just as Roderick had predicted. Taking advantage of the momentary confusion, they slipped from the trees and hurried toward the small door set into the massive wall. Roderick was waiting, his expression tense but resolute. "Quickly!" he hissed, ushering them through the narrow opening. "The execution has been moved up. They're bringing Thorn to the square now." Alaric's face darkened with urgency. "Lead the way, Captain." They followed Roderick through a series of narrow servants' passages, avoiding the main corridors where they might be seen. The castle was eerily quiet, most of its inhabitants having already gathered in the main square to witness the execution. As they neared the square, the murmur of the crowd became audible, a low, uneasy rumble of hundreds of voices. Roderick led them to a small door that opened onto an alley adjacent to the square. From there, they could see the wooden scaffold that had been erected in the center, surrounded by armed guards. "We're too late," Isolde whispered in horror. A figure was already being led up the steps to the platform, a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair, his hands bound before him. Despite his obvious mistreatment, he walked with dignity, his back straight and his head held high. "Thorn," Alaric breathed, his voice tight with barely contained rage. "We need to move now." But before they could step forward, a new figure appeared on the raised dais beside the scaffold. A woman in a gown of midnight blue, her silver-streaked black hair arranged in an elaborate crown of braids. Even from a distance, her regal bearing was unmistakable. Queen Ravenna had come to witness the execution herself, and beside her, resplendent in the royal colors of House Blackclaw, stood Lord Magnus, his handsome face set in a mask of solemn authority as he surveyed the crowd. Isolde felt her blood turn to ice at the sight of him. The man who had broken her heart, who had cast her aside when she no longer served his purpose, now stood at the Queen's right hand, positioned as the heir to the throne that rightfully belonged to Alaric. "We need a diversion," Alaric muttered, his eyes scanning the square for opportunities. "Something to draw the guards away from the scaffold." As if in answer to his plea, a commotion erupted at the far side of the square. Shouts and screams rose from the crowd as a massive black shape burst into view, snarling and snapping at the guards who tried to intercept it. A wolf, not as large as Alaric in his shifted form, but still formidable, its gray-streaked coat marking it as mature and experienced. It charged through the crowd, causing panic and confusion before leaping onto the scaffold itself. The guards around Thorn scattered, reaching for weapons. Queen Ravenna retreated with a cry of alarm, while Magnus stepped protectively in front of her, drawing a sword from his belt. "Now!" Alaric commanded, seizing the opportunity. "While they're distracted!" They burst from the alley, pushing their way through the panicked crowd toward the scaffold. Isolde lost sight of Roderick almost immediately in the chaos, but Alaric remained at her side, his hand gripping hers tightly as they fought their way forward. The wolf on the scaffold had positioned itself between Thorn and his executioners, snarling at anyone who tried to approach. It was buying them precious seconds, but it couldn't hold off the guards indefinitely. "Who is that?" Isolde gasped as they reached the foot of the scaffold. "Another shifter?" "Later," Alaric grunted, pulling her up the steps behind him. "Freya!" he called to the wolf. "Cover us!" The wolf, apparently a female named Freya, responded with a savage growl, lunging at the nearest guard who was attempting to approach from the side. They reached Thorn, who stared at Alaric with stunned recognition. "Sire," he croaked, disbelief warring with hope in his weathered face. "You live?" "Not for much longer if we don't move," Alaric replied grimly, slicing through Thorn's bonds with the dagger Eldrith had provided. "Can you walk?" "Run, if necessary," Thorn assured him, rubbing his chafed wrists. His gaze shifted to Isolde. "Who is this?" "A friend," Alaric said simply. "We need to get out of here." But escape, Isolde realized with sinking dread, was no longer an option. The initial confusion was subsiding, and the Queen's guards were regrouping, forming a cordon around the scaffold. And on the dais, Queen Ravenna was staring at her son with a mixture of shock and fury, while beside her, Magnus's handsome face had twisted into an expression of rage and disbelief. "Seize them!" the Queen commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Seize the impostor who dares to impersonate my dead son!" The guards moved to obey, closing in on the scaffold from all sides. Freya snarled and snapped, keeping them at bay momentarily, but she was outnumbered. It was only a matter of time. Alaric surveyed the situation with a warrior's calculating eye. Then, to Isolde's horror, he stepped forward to the edge of the scaffold, facing the crowd directly. "People of Northfell," he called, his voice ringing out across the square, "look upon your true king. I am Alaric Blackclaw, rightful ruler of this kingdom. I am not dead, as you have been told. I live, and I have returned to claim my throne." A hush fell over the square as hundreds of faces turned toward him. Isolde could see the confusion, the disbelief, the dawning hope in their expressions. "Lies!" Queen Ravenna shrieked. "This is a pretender! My son is dead!" "Mother," Alaric's voice was cold enough to freeze flame, "your plots have failed. Your assassins could not kill me, and neither can your lies. The truth stands before you, as do I." From the crowd a voice cried out, "Prove it! Prove you are the king!" Isolde saw Alaric's shoulders tense, knew what he was about to do. "Alaric," she warned in a desperate whisper, "not here." But it was too late. Alaric had made his decision. Before the gathered crowd, before his mother and the man who claimed to be his brother, he began to change. The transformation was both beautiful and terrible to witness. A shimmering aura enveloped him, and where the man had stood, the great black wolf now appeared, massive and majestic, his amber eyes blazing with power. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by cries of, "The Wolf King! The Wolf King returns!" Queen Ravenna's face had drained of all color. "Kill him!" she screamed at her guards. "Kill the beast!" The guards hesitated, many of them falling back in fear at the sight of the enormous wolf. Those brave or foolish enough to approach were met with Freya and Thorn, who had positioned themselves protectively on either side of Alaric. Isolde stood frozen, caught in the middle of this unfolding drama, uncertain of her role. Then her gaze fell on Magnus, who was staring at Alaric with naked hatred. As she watched, he drew his sword and leapt onto the scaffold, advancing toward the great wolf with deadly intent. Without thinking, Isolde stepped between them. "Stop!" she commanded, her voice stronger than she had ever heard it. Magnus faltered, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Isolde? What in the seven hells are you doing here?" "Preventing you from making the greatest mistake of your life," she replied steadily. "That is your king, Magnus. Your rightful king." "I am the rightful king," Magnus snarled, his handsome face contorted with rage. "I am the firstborn son of King Aldric Blackclaw." "You are nothing but a liar," Isolde retorted. A man who would claim a throne that isn't his, just as you claim to love a woman you only wanted for breeding stock. Magnus's eyes narrowed dangerously. You would be wise to step aside, Isolde. You're still as useless as the day I discarded you. A growl rumbled from behind her, Alaric responding to the insult. The sound sent a shiver through the air, a vibration of pure power that seemed to resonate within Isolde's very bones. And then, something extraordinary happened. As Alaric's growl touched her, Isolde felt a warmth bloom in her chest, spreading outward through her limbs. A golden light emanated from her skin, subtle at first, then growing in intensity until she shone like a beacon on the scaffold. "What sorcery is this?" Magnus breathed, taking an involuntary step backward. Isolde felt the change within her, not a physical transformation like Alaric's, but an awakening, as though something long dormant in her blood had finally stirred to life. Knowledge poured into her mind, ancient and powerful, the heritage of her Omega lineage that had been lost for generations. She understood now what she was, what she had always been meant to be. The perfect balance to Alaric's strength, the healing counterpart to his warrior's heart. Isolde raised her hands, and the golden light flowing from them illuminated the square, touching the faces of the watching crowd. "There will be no more bloodshed today," she declared, her voice carrying with unusual resonance. "The true king has returned, and with him the ancient balance is restored." From the crowd a woman called out, "The Omega Queen! The legends are true!" The murmur spread rapidly, and Isolde saw fear dawn on Queen Ravenna's face. She knew the old stories, understood what the appearance of an Omega meant to her, hold on power. "Seize them!" the queen commanded again, but her voice lacked conviction. "Seize the witch and the beast!" Not a single guard moved to obey. Instead, the captain of the royal guard stepped forward and knelt before the scaffold. "King Alaric," he said, his voice ringing clearly in the sudden hush. "Command us, your majesty." One by one, the other guards followed suit, kneeling and laying down their weapons. The tide had turned, public sentiment swinging decisively toward the Wolf King and the golden woman who stood beside him. Magnus, seeing his ambitions crumbling before his eyes, let out a cry of rage and lunged forward, sword still in hand, aimed directly at Alaric. But before the blade could connect, Thorn intercepted him, catching his arm in a powerful grip. "Enough," the old warrior said firmly. "It's over." Guards converged on Magnus, disarming him and forcing him to his knees before the scaffold. Queen Ravenna, seeing her last ally subdued, attempted to flee, only to be blocked by Freya, who had positioned herself at the exit from the dais. Alaric shifted back to human form, his transformation drawing another gasp from the crowd. He stood tall and regal despite his plain clothing, every inch a king reclaiming his rightful place. "People of Northfell," he addressed the gathered citizens, his voice strong and clear. "Today marks the end of a dark chapter in our history and the beginning of a new era of justice and prosperity. Those who have abused their power will be held accountable. Those who have remained loyal will be rewarded." He turned to Isolde, still glowing with that strange golden light, and extended his hand. "And the ancient balance, long lost to our kingdom, will be restored." Isolde hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, a surge of energy passed between them, visible to all as their respective auras, his midnight black, hers golden bright, merged and intertwined. The crowd erupted in cheers, the sound washing over the square like a wave. "Long live the Wolf King," they cried. "Long live the Omega Queen." Standing there on the scaffold, where moments before an execution had been planned, hand in hand with the king whose life she had saved, Isolde felt a sense of rightness she had never known before. This was her place. This was her destiny. The lost Omega had found her home. The journey from scaffold to throne was not a simple matter of claiming victory. After the dramatic confrontation in the town square, Alaric had established temporary headquarters in the castle's western wing, the most defensible position should Queen Ravenna's remaining loyalists attempt to strike back. Isolde had spent those first chaotic hours tending to Thorn's injuries from his time in captivity, while Alaric and Freya, now reverted to her human form, a stern-faced woman with gray-streaked hair and the bearing of a seasoned warrior, secured the castle and assessed which members of the court could be trusted. By evening, Orion had been safely escorted from the village to the castle, his joyful reunion with his father witnessed by many who had previously doubted Alaric's claim. The sight of the young prince running into the king's arms, laughing through tears, had done more to cement public opinion than any royal decree. Now, 3 days later, Isolde found herself in chambers befitting her new, still uncomfortable status. The rooms were spacious and elegant, with tall windows overlooking the castle gardens and furnishings of polished wood and rich fabrics, a far cry from her humble cottage at the forest's edge. She stood at the window, watching servants and guards move about the grounds below, the castle slowly returning to something resembling normal function after the upheaval. Her golden aura had faded soon after the confrontation in the square, but she could still feel the change within her, the awakened power of her Omega bloodline, dormant for so long, but now humming beneath her skin like a quiet, persistent melody. A knock at the door drew her from her thoughts. "Enter," she called, turning from the window. Lady Freya stepped into the chamber, now dressed in the formal uniform of the Royal Guard, the silver wolf insignia gleaming on her breast. She bowed stiffly, still formal despite the hours they had spent working together to restore order. "The king requests your presence in the council chamber," she announced. "The trial is about to begin." Isolde nodded, smoothing her hands over the unfamiliar silk of her gown, a deep forest green that reminded her of her beloved woods. "I'll come at once." As they walked the stone corridors of the castle, Freya glanced sideways at her. "You seem troubled, my lady." "Isolde," she corrected automatically. "And yes, I suppose I am. All this," she gestured to the opulent surroundings, "is very far from what I'm accustomed to." "Yet you stood on that scaffold as though born to it," Freya observed. "The way you confronted the false prince, the way you commanded the crowd. That was not the behavior of a woman unsure of her place." "In that moment, I wasn't," Isolde admitted. "Everything seemed so clear, so certain. But now the real work begins," Freya finished for her. "The glamour of revolution fades, and the hard business of governance takes its place." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "If it helps, His Majesty feels much the same. He may be king by birth, but the burden sits heavier after what he has witnessed." This surprised Isolde. "He seems so confident, so certain of his path." "A necessary appearance for a king," Freya replied. "But in private, he questions himself as any leader should. It is why he needs you, Lady Isolde, not just for the ancient magic of your bloodline, but for your clarity of purpose, your unshakable moral center." Before Isolde could respond to this unexpected assessment, they had reached the council chamber. 2 guards flanked the massive oak doors, standing to attention as they approached. They bowed to Isolde, a gesture that still startled her, before opening the doors to admit them. The council chamber was a grand, circular room with a high domed ceiling and tall windows that filled the space with afternoon light. A large round table occupied the center, carved from a single massive oak and polished to a soft gleam. Around it sat the newly assembled royal council. Thorn, looking stronger after days of rest and healing. Eldrith, the innkeeper whose loyalty had been rewarded with a position as royal steward. Several nobles and military leaders whose loyalty to Alaric had been confirmed. And at the head of the table, Alaric himself, imposing in formal royal attire of black and silver, the crown of Northfell resting on his dark hair. Despite the grandeur of his appearance, Isolde could see the weariness in the set of his shoulders, the tension around his eyes. When he saw her, however, his expression lightened perceptibly. "Lady Isolde," he greeted her, rising from his seat. "Thank you for joining us." The rest of the council stood as well, bowing as Isolde approached. She acknowledged them with an inclination of her head, still uncomfortable with such deference, but learning to accept it gracefully. "The prisoners await judgment, Your Majesty," Thorn reported, as they all resumed their seats. Isolde taking the empty chair to Alaric's right. Alaric nodded grimly. "Bring them in." The doors at the far end of the chamber opened, and guards escorted the two prisoners into the room. Queen Ravenna walked with her head high, still every inch the royal despite her plain prison garb and unbound hair. Her beauty remained striking even in middle age, and Isolde could see the resemblance to Alaric in the proud line of her jaw, the intensity of her gaze. Behind her came Magnus, his handsome face marred by a bruise along one cheekbone, a souvenir from his attempted escape the day after his capture. Unlike the queen, he could not maintain his dignity, his eyes darting nervously around the room, lingering for a moment on Isolde before dropping to the floor. The prisoners were brought to stand before the council table, their wrists bound with simple iron shackles. "Ravenna of House Blackclaw, former Queen Regent of Northfell," Alaric began, his voice formal and cold. "You stand accused of high treason against the crown, specifically conspiracy to murder the rightful king, your son, and usurp the throne. How do you answer these charges?" Ravenna's chin lifted higher, her eyes, the same amber as Alaric's, meeting his without fear. "I did what was necessary to protect this kingdom from a ruler unfit to govern," she replied, her voice clear and steady. "You are too soft, Alaric, too concerned with the common folk, too willing to cede royal authority to satisfy peasant demands. Your father was the same, and it nearly destroyed Northfell." "So you admit your guilt?" Thorne demanded, leaning forward. "I admit to putting the needs of the kingdom above the life of one man, even if that man is my son," Ravenna replied coolly. "Call it treason if you must, but I call it governance." Alaric's expression betrayed nothing, though Isolde, seated beside him, could sense the storm of emotions beneath his controlled exterior. "And you, Lord Magnus," he continued, turning to the second prisoner, "you stand accused not only of conspiracy with Queen Ravenna, but of falsely claiming royal blood, of attempting to usurp a throne to which you have no legitimate claim. How do you answer?" Unlike Ravenna, Magnus could not maintain his composure under the king's direct gaze. He shifted uncomfortably, eyes still downcast. "I was misled," he muttered. "The queen convinced me that I was your father's natural son, that I had a legitimate claim to the throne. She produced documents, witnesses. I believed her." "Liar," Ravenna hissed, turning on him. "You approached me with your scheme, not the other way around. You saw an opportunity in the king's supposed death and seized it." "The documents were forged at your instruction," Magnus shot back, his facade of contrition crumbling. "You promised me the throne in exchange for my support in eliminating Alaric." "Enough," Alaric interrupted, his voice like the crack of a whip. The prisoners fell silent immediately, Magnus flinching visibly. "Your mutual recriminations only confirm your guilt." He rose from his seat, circling the table to stand directly before the prisoners. "By all rights, I should sentence you both to death. Your crimes warrant nothing less." His gaze fixed on his mother. "You who gave me life sought 3 times to take it away. And you," he turned to Magnus, "who courted and discarded a woman solely to strengthen a fraudulent claim to my throne." Magnus darted a glance at Isolde, something like shame flickering across his features before he looked away again. "However," Alaric continued, "I am not my mother. I do not believe that royal authority must be maintained through blood and terror. Justice need not always demand death." He turned back to the council table, his gaze meeting Isolde's briefly before addressing the assembled advisors. "What say you, my council? What justice would you recommend for these traitors?" "Death," Thorne said immediately, his voice hard. "Their treachery nearly succeeded. Mercy would be seen as weakness." "I agree," Freya added grimly. "The law is clear on the punishment for high treason." Several other councillors nodded in agreement, their expressions solemn. "Lady Isolde?" Alaric prompted, his amber eyes fixed on her face. "What is your counsel?" Isolde felt the weight of every gaze in the room turned to her. She rose slowly from her seat, considering her words carefully. This was the moment, she knew, that would define not only the fate of the prisoners, but the nature of Alaric's reign going forward. "Death is the traditional punishment for treason," she acknowledged, "and few would question its application here. But is execution truly justice, or merely retribution? She moved to stand beside Alaric, facing the prisoners. Queen Ravenna acted from a misguided belief that she was protecting the kingdom. Lord Magnus from ambition and greed. Both crimes, yes, but different in nature and intent. She looked directly at Ravenna. For the former queen, I suggest permanent exile, stripped of all titles, lands, and privileges, forbidden to ever set foot in Northfell again on pain of death. Let her live out her days knowing that her son rules wisely and well without her influence. Ravenna's face betrayed nothing, but a muscle twitched in her jaw. And for Lord Magnus? Alaric asked, his voice neutral. Isolde turned to her former betrothed, studying his face. The man who had once seemed so charming, so worthy of her love, now appeared diminished, his handsome features contorted by fear and desperation. For Lord Magnus, I suggest a different path. He is a man who values status and appearance above all else, so let him be stripped of his title and lands and assigned to labor in service to those he would have ruled. Not in the mines or fields where his suffering would be private, but in the public square where all may witness his disgrace. Magnus's head snapped up, his eyes wide with horror. "You can't! That's worse than death!" "Is it?" Isolde asked calmly. "Death is quick. Redemption takes a lifetime. This way, Lord Magnus, you may yet earn back some measure of honor through honest work and humility, qualities you have sorely lacked." Murmurs ran around the council table, some approving, others skeptical. Alaric's expression remained unreadable as he considered her words. "An interesting proposal," he said finally. "One that speaks to the principles I wish to establish in my reign. Justice tempered with mercy, punishment that offers the possibility of redemption." He turned to the council. "Are there other opinions to be heard before I render judgment?" Eldrith, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "I support Lady Isolde's recommendation, Your Majesty. It shows strength, not weakness, to seek justice beyond the executioner's block." Thorne frowned, clearly displeased, but after a moment's consideration, he grudgingly nodded. "It is unorthodox, but perhaps fitting. The punishment will certainly be remembered." The other councillors offered their views, some supporting Isolde's suggestion, others advocating for traditional execution. Throughout the discussion, Alaric listened attentively, weighing each argument with careful consideration. When all had spoken, he addressed the prisoners once more. "Ravenna of House Blackclaw, I sentence you to permanent exile from the kingdom of Northfell. You will depart within 3 days, taking nothing but what you can carry. You will never again use the title of queen, nor claim any connection to the royal house. Should you ever return to Northfell, your life is forfeit." Ravenna's face remained impassive, but her shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. Whether in relief at being spared execution or despair at her banishment, Isolde couldn't tell. "Lord Magnus," Alaric continued, "you are hereby stripped of your title, lands, and privileges. For a period of 5 years, you will serve in the public square, maintaining its cleanliness and order, visible to all who pass through. After that time, if you have served faithfully and shown true remorse, you may petition for the return of your freedom, though never your title or lands." Magnus's face flushed with humiliation, but he offered no further protest, perhaps sensing that any argument might lead to a harsher sentence. "Guards, take the prisoners to prepare for their respective punishments," Alaric commanded. "This council is adjourned until tomorrow morning." The councillors rose, bowing to Alaric before filing out of the chamber. Isolde remained, watching as the guards led Ravenna and Magnus away, the former with her head still high, the latter slumped in defeat. When the room had emptied save for the two of them, Alaric let out a long breath, his royal demeanor softening. "That was difficult," he admitted, running a hand through his hair, dislodging the crown slightly. "You passed judgment fairly," Isolde observed. "Many kings would not have shown such restraint." "I surprised myself," Alaric replied with a rueful smile. "When I first saw them there, all I wanted was to sentence them both to death, to be done with their treachery once and for all." "What changed your mind?" His amber eyes met hers directly. "You did. Not just your counsel today, but everything you've shown me since we met. Compassion, even toward those who don't deserve it. Healing, not just of bodies, but of spirits." He hesitated, then added softly, "The world I want to build for Orion, for all children of Northfell, can't be founded on vengeance, no matter how justified." Isolde felt a warmth bloom in her chest at his words, at the evidence that this powerful man, this king, valued her perspective so deeply. "It won't be easy," she cautioned. "Many will see mercy as weakness, as your mother does." "Then we will prove them wrong," Alaric said firmly. "Together." The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond this single decision. Together. It suggested a future, a partnership, a shared purpose that Isolde was not yet certain she was ready to embrace fully. As if sensing her uncertainty, Alaric took a step back, giving her space. "I have asked much of you these past days," he acknowledged, "thrown you into a world of politics and intrigue far removed from your healing work at the forest's edge. I would understand if you wish to return there once the situation here is more stable." The offer was genuine, Isolde could tell, not a test or a manipulation, but a sincere acknowledgement of her right to choose her own path. "I haven't decided what I want," she admitted honestly. "Everything has happened so quickly." "Of course," Alaric agreed readily. "There is no need for decisions yet. You have a place here for as long as you wish it, in whatever capacity feels right to you." His generosity only underscored the complexity of her situation. This man, this king, had awakened something within her that she was only beginning to understand. Not just the ancient Omega power that had manifested so dramatically in the square, but deeper feelings that both attracted and terrified her. "Thank you," she said simply, not yet ready to address the unspoken questions between them. "Is there anything else you need from me today?" "Nothing official," Alaric replied. "Though if you're not too weary, Orion has been asking for you. He's fascinated by your knowledge of herbs and healing, and full of questions about your golden light." The mention of the young prince brought a genuine smile to Isolde's face. Despite her reservations about court life, about her place in this grand castle, she had formed a deep attachment to the boy. "I'd be happy to spend time with him. He's in the royal garden with his tutor. I'll join you both for the evening meal, if that's acceptable." "Of course." As Isolde made her way through the castle toward the gardens, she reflected on how quickly her life had transformed. Just weeks ago, she had been a solitary healer in a forgotten cottage, her heart scarred by rejection, her future a quiet, lonely path stretching before her. Now she walked the corridors of a royal castle, addressed as "my lady" by those she passed, her counsel sought by the king himself. And not just any king, a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable, who had listened to her deepest pains in his wolf form, who had awakened an ancient power within her bloodline that she had never known existed. The royal garden was a peaceful oasis within the castle walls, filled with medicinal herbs, flowering plants, and carefully tended trees. Isolde found Orion sitting cross-legged on the grass beside an elderly man who appeared to be explaining the properties of various plants. The boy's face lit up when he spotted her. "Isolde," he called, scrambling to his feet and running to meet her. "Master Cedric is teaching me about healing herbs, but I told him you know more than anyone." The old tutor rose more slowly, bowing respectfully to Isolde. "Lady Isolde, it's an honor. The prince speaks very highly of your knowledge." "Master Cedric," she acknowledged with a smile, "I hope Orion isn't being too much trouble." "Not at all," the tutor assured her. "He has a natural curiosity that makes teaching him a pleasure." He glanced at the boy, who was practically bouncing with excitement. "Perhaps I should leave you two to discuss herbs without my less expert interference." "Nonsense," Isolde protested. "I'm sure your knowledge far exceeds mine." "You're too modest, my lady," Cedric replied with a twinkle in his rheumy eyes. "But I welcome the opportunity to learn from you as well. The prince tells me you performed remarkable healing on His Majesty's wounds." "Nothing so extraordinary," Isolde demurred. "Just old remedies passed down from my grandfather." "Can you show us your golden light again?" Orion interrupted eagerly. Father says it's because you're a true Omega and that you can heal with just a touch. Isolde knelt to the boy's level, choosing her words carefully. The light came in a moment of great need, she explained. I'm still learning to understand it myself. It's not something I can simply call forth at will. Orion's face fell slightly, but he recovered quickly. That's all right. Father says the same thing about shifting, that it takes practice and patience. He grabbed her hand. Come see the wolfsbane Master Cedric was showing me. He says it's poison to most people, but that Father and I can touch it safely because of our blood. As Orion dragged her toward a patch of purple flowers, Isolde caught Master Cedric's amused gaze. He's been like this all afternoon, the tutor confided, full of questions about alphas and omegas, about the old legends. The events in the square have captured his imagination completely. It's a lot for a child to process, Isolde observed, watching as Orion carefully touched the distinctive hooded blooms of the wolfsbane. Children are remarkably resilient, Cedric replied, and Prince Orion has endured much in his young life, his mother's death, the attempts on his father's life, their flight through the forest. Through it all, he has maintained his spirit, his curiosity. The old man's gaze was shrewd as it rested on Isolde. He has taken to you very quickly. Children often do, Isolde said. Something about my healing energy, perhaps. Perhaps, Cedric agreed. Or perhaps he senses, as we all do, that you are exactly what this royal family needs. A grounding influence, a healer for more than just physical wounds. Before Isolde could respond to this assessment, Orion called for her attention again, eager to show her a rare herb he had discovered at the garden's edge. The rest of the afternoon passed pleasantly, with Orion's enthusiasm drawing both Isolde and Master Cedric into detailed explanations of various plants and their medicinal uses. By the time Alaric joined them for the evening meal, served at a small table in the garden rather than the formal dining hall, Isolde found herself more relaxed than she had been since arriving at the castle. The simple joy of sharing knowledge, of seeing Orion's face light up with understanding, had reminded her of why she had become a healer in the first place. You seem in better spirits, Alaric observed, as they dined on a simple but delicious meal of roasted game hen, fresh bread, and vegetables from the garden itself. Your son is a remarkable teacher, Isolde replied with a smile for Orion, who was currently explaining to Master Cedric why wolves were superior to dogs in every way. He takes after his mother in that, Alaric said softly, a shadow of old grief passing across his features. She had a gift for making complex ideas accessible, for seeing connections others missed. It was the first time he had mentioned Orion's mother, and Isolde found herself curious but hesitant to pry. You must miss her greatly, she ventured carefully. Alaric's gaze grew distant. Liana was extraordinary. A scholar, a diplomat, beloved by the people. Our marriage was arranged for political purposes, but we grew to care for each other deeply. His voice softened further. She died when Orion was just 2, a sudden wasting illness that not even the court physicians could combat. I'm sorry, Isolde said, genuinely moved by the lingering pain in his voice. As am I. Alaric seemed to shake himself from the memory, his focus returning to the present. But life continues. Orion keeps her memory alive in ways he doesn't even realize. A turn of phrase, a particular expression, a love of learning that mirrors hers. The conversation turned to lighter topics as the meal progressed, but Isolde found herself watching Alaric with new understanding. His devotion to his son, his determination to create a better kingdom for the next generation, these were not abstract principles, but deeply personal commitments, born from loss and love. As twilight descended on the garden, Master Cedric excused himself to return Orion to his chambers for the night. The boy protested sleepily, but eventually agreed after extracting promises from both Alaric and Isolde to continue their herb lessons the following day. Left alone in the gathering darkness, Isolde and Alaric sat in companionable silence for a time, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. I judged them today, Alaric said finally, his voice low. Tomorrow I must begin to rule in earnest. The council expects decisions on a dozen matters: taxes, trade agreements, military deployments. You sound concerned, Isolde observed. I am, he admitted. Fighting for one's throne is straightforward in its way. Governing well is infinitely more complex. You have wise counselors, she reminded him. Thorn, Freya, Eldrith, they all bring different perspectives, different strengths. Yes, Alaric agreed. But none of them challenge me as you do, Isolde. None of them see beyond the immediate political concerns to the deeper questions of justice and compassion. He turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. I need your voice in my council, not just as a symbol of the restored Omega bloodline, but as yourself, the woman who opened her door to a wounded wolf, who stood between a king and an assassin, who advocated mercy when others called for blood. The raw honesty in his request touched Isolde deeply. This was not a king demanding obedience, but a man acknowledging his own limitations, seeking balance and wisdom beyond his own perspective. I know little of politics, she warned. My expertise is in healing, in herbs and remedies. Northfell needs healing, Alaric countered. Years of my mother's harsh rule, followed by the chaos of recent weeks. The kingdom is wounded in ways that go beyond physical injury. Who better to guide its recovery than a healer? Put that way, it was difficult to refuse. And despite her reservations about court life, Isolde could not deny the pull she felt toward this man, this place, this purpose that seemed to call to the newly awakened power within her. I will help where I can, she agreed finally, though I make no promises about my effectiveness as a royal counselor. Relief washed over Alaric's features, followed quickly by something deeper, more intense. Thank you, he said simply. Then, after a pause, there is something else I must ask you, though it need not be answered tonight. Isolde felt her pulse quicken, suspecting what might come next. Yes? The bond between Alpha and Omega is rare and precious, Alaric began carefully. What happened in the square, the manifestation of your power, the way it resonated with mine, confirms what I sensed from the beginning. We are connected, Isolde, in ways that transcend ordinary understanding. The legends speak of such bonds, she acknowledged, her voice barely above a whisper. They do, Alaric agreed, and tradition would dictate that we formalize this bond, that you take your place as Queen of Northfell, as my mate in the eyes of gods and men. Isolde's breath caught. Despite having anticipated this direction, the reality of his words still struck her with force. And what do you want, Alaric? Beyond tradition and legend? His amber eyes, so like the wolf's that had first gazed at her from her cottage doorway, held hers steadily. I want a partner, he said simply. Someone who sees me as a man, not just a king. Someone who challenges me when I falter, supports me when I doubt, reminds me always of the good we can achieve together. His voice deepened. I believe that person is you, Isolde, but I will not press for an answer you are not ready to give. The sincerity in his words, the depth of feeling behind them, was unmistakable. This was not a political proposal, nor a demand based solely on ancient bloodlines and magical bonds. This was a man offering his heart, with all its complexities and vulnerabilities. I need time, Isolde said finally. Not because I doubt what I feel for you, but because I want to be certain that any decision I make is for the right reasons, not from the heat of recent events, not from the pull of magical bonds, but from clear-eyed choice. Far from being disappointed, Alaric seemed to approve of her caution. Take all the time you need, he assured her. Whatever your eventual decision, you have a place here, and my respect. As darkness settled fully over the garden, they sat together a while longer, speaking of simpler things. Orion's progress with his studies, the medicinal herbs Isolde had identified in the royal garden, the weather patterns that suggested an early autumn approaching. In this quiet moment, away from the formalities of court and the weight of recent upheavals, Isolde could glimpse what a future with Alaric might truly be like. Not just crowns and councils, but moments of genuine connection, of shared purpose and mutual understanding. It was a future she had never imagined for herself in her solitary cottage at the forest's edge. Yet as the stars wheeled overhead and the night air carried the scent of late summer blooms, she found herself increasingly able to envision it. The lost Omega and the Wolf King, forging a new path together for themselves and for Northfell. Perhaps not tonight, perhaps not tomorrow, but someday, when the time was right, when her heart was certain. Until then, she would heal, she would counsel, she would learn, and in the process, perhaps she would find not just her place in this new world, but her own power within it. The autumn winds swept across the kingdom of Northfell, painting the vast forests in hues of gold and crimson. 3 months had passed since Alaric's dramatic return to power, and the realm was slowly healing from the wounds of Ravenna's reign. The former queen had departed for exile in the southern kingdoms, escorted to the border by royal guard to ensure she did not linger or plot further mischief. Magnus had begun his public punishment in the square, his once proud bearing diminished by the simple clothing and menial tasks now required of him. Within the castle, preparations were underway for an event not seen in generations, the Festival of the Moon's Blessing, a celebration of the autumn equinox that held special significance in the old traditions of Alpha and Omega bloodlines. The festival had been abandoned during Ravenna's time as queen consort, deemed too closely tied to primitive superstitions for her modern sensibilities. Its revival was both symbolic and practical, a way to honor the kingdom's ancient heritage while providing the common folk with a much-needed celebration after years of harsh rule. Isolde stood on the battlements, watching as servants and artisans transformed the castle courtyard below into a spectacle of autumn bounty. Tables were being arranged in a great circle, representing the cycle of seasons. Garlands of wheat, late-blooming flowers, and fiery leaves adorned every archway and column. In the center, a massive bonfire was being constructed, its unlit timbers arranged in a careful spiral that would burn from dusk until dawn. Quite the transformation, isn't it? Isolde turned to find Freya approaching, the captain's silver-streaked hair pulled back in her customary severe style, though she had exchanged her usual armor for more formal attire in preparation for the evening's events. "It's beautiful," Isolde agreed. "Though I must admit, I'm still learning the significance of all the symbols." "The old ways are returning," Freya observed, coming to stand beside her at the battlements. "Not just in festivals and ceremonies, but in the very fabric of the kingdom. The council listens when you speak now. Even Thorn, stubborn as he is, has come to value your perspective." It was true, though still sometimes surprising to Isolde herself. In the months since the confrontation in the square, she had taken an increasingly active role in the governance of Northfell. What had begun as offering occasional counsel on matters of healing and justice had evolved into a recognized position of influence, with even the most traditional nobles acknowledging her insights. "They listen because the king does," Isolde demurred, still uncomfortable with praise for her political acumen. "The king listens because you speak wisdom," Freya countered. "The rest of us follow his example, but we recognize the value you bring in your own right." The captain's weathered face softened slightly. "You have changed him, you know, made him more measured, more thoughtful, yet also more decisive when action is required." Isolde felt a now familiar warmth at the mention of Alaric. Their relationship had developed gradually over the past months, built on mutual respect and growing affection rather than rushed by the magical bond they both acknowledged existed between them. He had been true to his word, never pressing her for a formal commitment, allowing her the time and space to find her place in this new world. "He has changed me as well," she admitted quietly, "helped me find strength I didn't know I possessed." Freya studied her with shrewd eyes. "And yet you still haven't accepted his proposal." The direct statement, so typical of the blunt captain, brought a flush to Isolde's cheeks. "Is that common knowledge in the castle?" "Only to those who pay attention," Freya replied with a slight smile. "The king hasn't spoken of it, but his eyes follow you whenever you're in the same room. And you—" She tilted her head, considering. "You look at him when you think no one is watching. Like now." Isolde followed Freya's gaze down to the courtyard, where Alaric had emerged from the main hall. He moved among the workers, speaking with each group, his tall figure commanding yet approachable. Even from a distance, she could see how the people brightened in his presence, standing taller, working with renewed energy after his acknowledgement. "Tonight is significant, you know," Freya continued, her voice dropping lower. "The Festival of the Moon's Blessing was traditionally when Alpha-Omega bonds were formalized. The old texts speak of the equinox as a time when the powers of both bloodlines are in perfect balance." "I've been reading those texts," Isolde acknowledged. Master Cedric had been guiding her through the ancient volumes in the castle library, helping her understand her heritage and the abilities that had manifested so dramatically during the confrontation with Magnus and Ravenna. "And?" Freya prompted. Isolde sighed, turning away from the view of Alaric below. "And I'm still uncertain. Not about my feelings for him," she clarified, seeing Freya's expression, "but about what it means to be queen, to bear that responsibility alongside him." The older woman nodded thoughtfully. "A reasonable concern. The crown is indeed a heavy burden. But consider this. You already shoulder much of that burden. The people already look to you for guidance, for healing. The court already respects your judgment. The title would merely acknowledge what has already come to pass." "Perhaps," Isolde conceded. "But it would also change things, wouldn't it? Make everything more formal, less a choice and more an obligation." "Only if you allow it to become so," Freya countered. "Alaric has never been one for empty formalities. He values substance over ceremony." Before Isolde could respond, a small figure burst through the door leading to the battlements, dark hair flying wild in the autumn wind. Orion, flushed with excitement, hurried toward them. "Isolde! Captain Freya!" he called, skidding to a stop before them. "Father says I can help light the bonfire tonight, and he says you'll both sit at the high table with us." Isolde smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. In the months since their return to the castle, Orion had blossomed, his solemn demeanor giving way to more frequent moments of childish exuberance. He had taken to his lessons with diligence, especially those on healing herbs with Isolde and Master Cedric, but had also developed a close bond with Freya, who was teaching him the basics of swordplay despite Alaric's initial reservations. "A great honor, Your Highness," Freya replied with unusual formality, though her eyes twinkled with affection for the young prince. "Will you wear your special dress, Isolde?" Orion asked, turning his amber eyes, so like his father's, up to her. "Special dress?" she echoed, puzzled. "The green one with the silver leaves," Orion explained impatiently. "Father had it made for you, for tonight." Isolde exchanged a quick glance with Freya, who raised an eyebrow but remained silent. "This is the first I've heard of it," Isolde told the boy gently. "Oh." Orion's face fell momentarily. "It was supposed to be a surprise. Father will be cross with me for telling." "Your father is never cross with you," Isolde assured him, smoothing a wayward lock of hair from his forehead. "And I promise to act surprised when I see the dress." This seemed to mollify the prince, who nodded seriously before launching into an excited description of the festival preparations he'd witnessed in the kitchens. Freya excused herself after a few minutes, mentioning security arrangements that needed her attention, leaving Isolde and Orion alone on the battlements. "Isolde," the boy said suddenly, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, "will you stay with us forever, here at the castle?" The directness of the question caught Isolde off guard. She knelt to bring herself to his eye level, choosing her words carefully. "I plan to stay for a very long time," she told him. "Why do you ask?" Orion's small face was unusually solemn. "Father says you might be our queen someday, but I heard Lord Thorn telling Master Cedric that you haven't decided yet, and that some of the other kingdoms are offering their princesses to father instead." Isolde felt a sharp pang at this information, though she kept her expression neutral. "Your father and I have much to discuss," she said gently. "But whatever happens, Orion, I promise you that I will always be here for you. You are very important to me." The boy studied her face intently, with that preternatural perception that sometimes made him seem older than his years. "I want you to be my mother," he said simply. "I don't remember my real mother, but Father says she was kind and wise, like you, and when you're around, Father smiles more." Isolde felt her throat tighten with emotion. In all her deliberations about Alaric's proposal, about her role in the kingdom, she had perhaps not given enough weight to this, the place she already held in Orion's heart. "That's a very great honor," she managed finally, "and something I would never take lightly." Orion seemed satisfied with this response. "You should wear the dress tonight," he advised seriously. "Father spent a long time with the seamstress, telling her exactly how it should look. He said it had to be perfect for the Queen of the Moon." "Queen of the Moon," Isolde repeated, unfamiliar with the term. "From the old stories," Orion explained. "The Alpha is the king of the sun, the Omega is the queen of the moon. Together they make balance." He furrowed his brow, trying to remember exactly. "Master Cedric told me all about it. Tonight, at the equinox, day and night are equal. That's why it's special for Alphas and Omegas." Isolde was surprised by the boy's knowledge, though she supposed she shouldn't be. Orion absorbed everything around him like a sponge, especially matters related to the ancient traditions of his bloodline. "Well then," she said, rising to her feet, "I should prepare for the festival. Would you like to walk with me back to the main hall?" Orion nodded eagerly, taking her hand as they made their way down from the battlements. As they walked through the bustling corridors of the castle, Isolde found her thoughts turning to the special dress Alaric had commissioned. The gesture touched her deeply, but also heightened her awareness of the decision that loomed before her. When they reached the junction where their paths would diverge, Orion to his lessons with Master Cedric, Isolde to her chambers, the boy looked up at her with those uncanny amber eyes. "He's afraid you'll say no," he said abruptly. "Father, I mean. I heard him telling Lord Thorn that he won't pressure you, even if it means losing the alliance with Eastmark." Before Isolde could respond to this startling revelation, Orion had darted away down the corridor, leaving her with more questions than answers. Her chambers, when she reached them, were not empty as expected. 2 maidservants were laying out a gown on her bed, their expressions a mixture of excitement and reverence as they handled the garment. "My lady," they greeted her, curtsying deeply. "His Majesty asked that this be delivered to you for tonight's festival." Isolde approached the bed, her breath catching at the sight of the dress. It was exquisite, deep forest green velvet that would catch the light like leaves in sunshine, with delicate silver embroidery along the fitted bodice and flowing sleeves. The embroidery, she realized upon closer inspection, was not merely decorative, but formed ancient symbols of healing and protection, interwoven with stylized wolves and crescent moons. "His Majesty designed the patterns himself," one of the maids volunteered, clearly proud to be part of this special delivery. The seamstress said she'd never seen a king take such interest in a gown's details. "It's beautiful," Isolde murmured, reaching out to touch the soft fabric. "There's more, my lady," the second maid said, producing a small wooden box from a side table, to complete the ensemble. Inside the box, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, lay a circlet of finely wrought silver. It was not as elaborate as a formal crown, but the craftsmanship was exquisite. Delicate silver leaves and vines intertwined with small crescent moons, with a larger crescent rising at the front. "The Queen of the Moon's diadem," the maid explained reverently. "From the royal treasury. It hasn't been worn in generations." Isolde lifted the circlet carefully. It was lighter than it appeared, and as she held it, she felt a strange resonance, as though the metal itself recognized her touch, the same resonance she had felt when her Omega powers had first manifested in the town square. "His Majesty said you are under no obligation to wear either item," the first maid added hastily, perhaps noting Isolde's pensive expression. "He was most insistent that we convey that message." "Thank him for his thoughtfulness," Isolde replied. "And please, leave me now. I need to prepare for the evening." When the maids had departed, Isolde sat on the edge of her bed, the circlet still in her hands, the beautiful gown spread beside her. Alaric's message was clear, though subtly conveyed, an invitation, not a demand, a recognition of what could be, without pressure for what must be, and yet According to Orion's inadvertently revealed information, there were political considerations at play as well. An alliance with Eastmark, presumably through marriage to one of their princesses, a practical arrangement that a king might make for the good of his realm, setting aside personal desires for strategic advantage. Isolde closed her eyes, centering herself as Master Cedric had taught her during their sessions on controlling her Omega abilities. She sought the calm at her core, the place of clarity that allowed her to see beyond immediate reactions to deeper truths. In that stillness, she found her answer, had perhaps known it all along, but had needed time to accept its implications, its responsibilities, its joys. She rose and rang for a bath to be prepared. Tonight, she would wear the Queen of the Moon's diadem and all that it represented. The Festival of the Moon's Blessing began at sunset, with the lighting of the great bonfire in the castle courtyard. Alaric, resplendent in formal attire of black and silver, performed the ceremony himself, assisted by Orion, whose face shone with pride as he helped his father ignite the carefully constructed pyre. The flames leaped upward in a perfect spiral, drawing gasps of appreciation from the assembled crowd of nobles, servants, and common folk who had been invited within the castle walls for the celebration. Isolde watched from the entrance to the main hall, her heart beating rapidly beneath the exquisite green gown. She had declined the attendants who had offered to escort her, preferring to make this entrance on her own terms, in her own time. As the bonfire blazed fully to life, Alaric turned to address the gathering. His deep voice carried easily across the courtyard, speaking of renewal, of ancient traditions honored anew, of the balance between strength and healing that had once been the foundation of Northfell's prosperity and would be again. From her vantage point, Isolde could see the reactions of the crowd, the older citizens nodding in approval at the revival of beloved customs, the younger ones captivated by the pageantry, all of them united in their attention to their king. 3 months of just and thoughtful rule had done much to heal the divisions created during Ravenna's time. When Alaric concluded his address, musicians began to play, ancient melodies on pipes and drums that seemed to call to something primal in the blood. Servants moved among the guests with trays of food and drink, and the formal rigidity of court etiquette relaxed into the more communal spirit of the festival. Isolde took a deep breath and stepped forward into the courtyard. The effect was immediate. Those nearest to her fell silent, their gazes drawn to the vision she presented in the firelight. The deep green of her gown capturing the essence of the forest, the silver embroidery catching the light of the flames, and atop her dark hair, the Queen of the Moon's diadem, its crescent gleaming like a benediction. The silence spread outward, like ripples in a pond, as more people turned to look. The musicians faltered momentarily, then recovered, their melody shifting to a more stately, reverent tune traditionally played for royal entrances. Across the courtyard, Alaric stood motionless, his amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. Beside him, Orion was practically bouncing with excitement, tugging at his father's sleeve and pointing, though Alaric needed no direction to find her in the crowd. Isolde moved forward, the crowd parting before her. She was acutely aware of the significance of her choice. Wearing the diadem was a statement that would be understood by everyone present, especially given the symbolism of the night. When she reached the center of the courtyard, near the blazing bonfire, Alaric stepped forward to meet her. Up close, she could see the play of emotions across his face, surprise, hope, and a deeper, more profound feeling that made her heart race. "You wear it well," he said simply, his voice pitched for her ears alone, despite the hundreds gathered around them. "It feels right," she replied, equally soft. "As does this." She gestured to the gown. "Thank you for the gift. It's beautiful." "Not half so beautiful as the woman wearing it," Alaric countered, a smile touching the corners of his mouth. Before she could respond, Master Cedric stepped forward, his aged voice rising surprisingly strong above the murmur of the crowd. "Your Majesty, my lady, tradition dictates that the Festival of the Moon's Blessing begin with the Dance of Balance. Would you honor us by leading it?" The Dance of Balance was another ancient custom, symbolic of the harmony between Alpha and Omega bloodlines. Isolde had read about it in the old texts, but had never seen it performed. By Alaric's expression, he too knew of it only through tradition. "It would be our pleasure," Alaric answered for them both, extending his hand to Isolde. As she placed her fingers in his, she felt that now familiar surge of energy between them, like recognition on the deepest level, the alpha and omega within them acknowledging each other. The musicians began a new melody, stately and measured, with complex harmonies that seemed to weave together like threads in a tapestry. Alaric led her to the open space nearest the fire, where the stones of the courtyard had been swept clear. Other couples, nobles, servants, villagers, formed a circle around them, waiting to join the dance once the king and his chosen partner had established the pattern. "I should warn you," Isolde murmured as Alaric placed one hand at her waist, the other still clasping hers. "I know nothing of court dances." "Neither do I," he admitted with a small smile. "But I suspect this is less about skill and more about intention." He was right. As they began to move together, following the ancient rhythm, Isolde found that the steps came naturally, not from memory or training, but from something deeper, as though their bodies remembered what their minds had never learned. They circled each other, came together, parted, and returned, the pattern growing more complex with each repetition. Around them, the other dancers joined in, each couple finding their own interpretation of the traditional steps, creating a flowing mosaic of movement around the central fire. Yet all eyes returned again and again to the king and the woman who wore the Queen of the Moon's diadem, their dance transcending mere physical movement to become something almost mystical in the firelight. As the music reached its crescendo, Alaric drew Isolde closer, his voice low and urgent in her ear. "When you appeared wearing the diadem, I thought perhaps—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Isolde, does this mean what I hope it means?" She met his gaze steadily, finding in those amber depths the same man who had first come to her as a wounded wolf, who had trusted her with his life and his sons. The king who ruled with justice tempered by mercy. The father who placed his child's well-being above all else. "It means I've made my choice," she replied softly, "if your offer still stands." Alaric's hand tightened on hers. "It has never wavered," he assured her. "But I must ask, what of your concerns about court life, about the burdens of the crown?" "They haven't disappeared," Isolde acknowledged honestly. "But I've realized something these past months. I'm already sharing those burdens with you, already committed to this kingdom and its people." Her voice softened further. "Already bound to you and Orion in ways that go beyond titles or ceremonies." The music was winding down, the dancers slowing around them. Soon attention would turn to the feast, to the other rituals of the night. This moment of private connection would end. "There is something else," Isolde added, thinking of what Orion had inadvertently revealed. "Something about an alliance with Eastmark?" Surprise flickered across Alaric's face. "How did you—" He shook his head ruefully. "Orion's ears hear more than we realize." "Is it true?" she pressed. "Would marrying one of their princesses strengthen Northfell?" "On paper, perhaps," Alaric conceded. "Thorn made the argument, but I rejected the proposal weeks ago." His gaze was steady, unflinching. "There is only one woman I wish to rule beside me, Isolde. Only one who can be mother to Orion, healer to our people, balance to my strength." The music ended, the dancers coming to a standstill around them. In the moment of silence that followed, Isolde made her final decision. "Then ask me," she said softly, "here now, before all your people." Understanding dawned in Alaric's eyes. With a slight nod, he released her hand and stepped back slightly. Then, to the astonishment of the gathered crowd, the king of Northfell knelt before her, taking her hand in his. "Isolde of the Elderwood," he said, his voice ringing clear in the sudden hush, "true Omega and healer of our people, you who saved my life when I came to you as a wounded wolf, who protected my son when all seemed lost, who stood beside me to reclaim our kingdom, will you join your bloodline with mine, your strength with mine, your life with mine? Will you be my queen, my mate, my heart's companion for all the days we are granted?" The courtyard was utterly silent. Hundreds of faces turned toward them, hundreds of breaths held in anticipation. Isolde was acutely aware of the weight of the moment, not just for her and Alaric, but for the kingdom, for the future they were building together. "I will," she answered, her voice steady and clear, "not for power or position, but for love of you, of Orion, of this land and its people. I will be your queen, your mate, your heart's companion from this night forward." A cheer erupted from the crowd, starting near the bonfire and rolling outward until it seemed the very stones of the castle must vibrate with the sound. Alaric rose, his face alight with joy, rarely displayed so openly before his subjects. He reached for the diadem she wore, adjusting it slightly on her brow. "The Queen of the Moon returns to Northfell," he proclaimed, his voice carrying to the farthest corners of the courtyard. "The ancient balance is restored." The cheer redoubled, and through the crowd Isolde saw Orion racing toward them, his small face incandescent with happiness. He threw himself into her arms, nearly knocking her off balance. "I knew you'd say yes," he cried, hugging her fiercely. "I knew it!" Isolde returned his embrace, feeling Alaric's arm encircle them both. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the bonfire and the goodwill of the people, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of celebration. There was the formal feast at the high table, where Isolde sat at Alaric's right hand, Orion beside her, beaming with pride as nobles and commoners alike came to offer their congratulations. There were ancient rituals performed by Master Cedric, binding king and future queen in the sight of the old powers. There was music and dancing late into the night, the traditional patterns giving way to more exuberant celebrations as wine flowed freely and formality relaxed. Through it all, Isolde maintained a quiet center of certainty. This was where she belonged, not in isolation at the forest's edge, nursing old wounds, but here, in the heart of the kingdom, helping to heal its hurts and build its future. As the night deepened and the celebrations continued, Alaric drew her away from the noise and bustle, up to the quiet solitude of the battlements where they had spoken that very afternoon. The bonfire below still burned bright, its spiral of flames reaching toward the stars, but the sounds of revelry were muted by distance. "Happy?" he asked simply, his hand warm around hers. "Yes," Isolde replied with equal simplicity. "Though somewhat overwhelmed, I hadn't expected quite such an enthusiastic response from the people." Alaric chuckled, the sound low and warm in the night air. "They have been waiting for this, though perhaps they didn't realize it. The return of the Omega Queen is deeply embedded in our legends and prophecies. For many, especially the older citizens, your appearance at the confrontation with my mother was the fulfillment of stories they had heard since childhood." "And for you?" Isolde asked, turning to face him fully. "What does it mean to you, beyond legends and prophecies?" His amber eyes, reflecting the distant firelight, held hers steadily. "It means I am no longer alone," he said quietly. "That I have found my match, my balance, my heart's home." His voice deepened. "When Liana died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I would rule alone, raise Orion alone, bear the weight of the crown alone. Then a wounded wolf collapsed at your doorstep, and everything changed." Isolde reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "For me as well," she admitted. "I thought my heart was finished with love, with trust, that my isolation was the safest path forward. And now? Now I understand that true safety isn't found in walls or distance, but in connections, in chosen family, in purpose shared." She smiled, feeling the rightness of her next words. "In the balance between Alpha and Omega, sun and moon, strength and healing." Alaric's arms encircled her, drawing her close against the autumn chill. "The formal coronation will be held at midwinter," he murmured against her hair. "Another traditional time for Alpha-Omega ceremonies. Between now and then, there will be much to prepare, much to learn. I have excellent teachers, Isolde reminded him. Freya, Thorn, Eldrith, Master Cedric, and you, of course. And Orion, Alaric added with a soft laugh, who will no doubt appoint himself your primary instructor in all matters of royal protocol, based on his extensive 5 years of experience. The mention of the boy brought a warm smile to Isolde's face. He called me mother today, did you know? Not directly to me, but when he was telling one of the kitchen staff about the bonfire lighting ceremony. My mother will be watching, he said. Alaric's expression softened. Does that trouble you? No, Isolde replied thoughtfully. It feels right somehow. Not as though I'm replacing Lyanna, I know I could never do that, but as though I'm continuing what she began. Loving him, guiding him, helping him grow into the man he's meant to become. The man he's already becoming, Alaric agreed. Largely thanks to you. He was withdrawn after the attacks, after our flight. I feared the trauma had marked him too deeply. But since we found you, since you joined our lives, he has flourished. Below them, the festivities continued, though at a somewhat subdued pace as the night grew later. The bonfire would burn until dawn, tended by designated keepers who would ensure it maintained its spiral pattern, symbolic of the cycle of seasons, of life and renewal. There will be challenges ahead, Alaric said after a comfortable silence. My mother may be in exile, but she still has supporters. Magnus has been surprisingly compliant with his punishment, which makes me suspicious of his true intentions. And there are other kingdoms watching Northfell closely, some as potential allies, others as potential threats. We will face them together, Isolde assured him, her voice steady with newfound confidence, as we were meant to. Alaric's arms tightened around her, and she felt the deep resonance of their bond, not just the magical connection of Alpha and Omega bloodlines, but the more profound bond that had grown between them as man and woman, as partners in purpose and in life. In that moment, standing on the battlements of Northfell Castle with the equinox night spread around them and the future stretching before them, Isolde knew that she had truly found her home. Not in the solitary cottage where she had nursed her wounds, but here, in the heart of the kingdom, beside the man who had come to her first as a wounded wolf and would stand beside her now as king and mate. The lost Omega had found her place. The hidden girl had stepped into the light, and in that light, all the shadows of the past, the rejection, the isolation, the doubt, were finally completely banished. Below, in the courtyard, voices rose in an ancient song of blessing. Above, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, bearing witness to the balance restored. Alpha and Omega, sun and moon, king and queen, two halves of a greater whole. Northfell would thrive again under their united strength and wisdom. And in the stories told for generations to come, people would speak of the night when the Wolf King knelt before the healer who had saved him, and how the Queen of the Moon had returned to bring healing to a wounded land.